There's something tender about stories whispered in the middle of the night, as if they belong not to the day, but to the soft hush of the dark. Tonight I want to share one with you. One about strange beginnings, quiet journeys, and the way even the loudest of worlds eventually fall into silence. It isn't a tale of battles or explosions, but of small kindnesses, odd discoveries, and the way a heart can grow in unexpected places. And as you listen, know this: we truly care for you here. You matter, and your quiet presence means more than you think. This story is just as much for you as it is about them. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The house was never entirely quiet, though others might have thought it so. To him, silence carried layers. The walls breathed faintly with the shifting of old wood, and the lamps flickered as if each one had its own little mood. In the stillness of certain nights, he could hear something softer than sound, like the hush of a lullaby too tired to finish its tune. He didn't know if the whispers belonged to the house, to his mind, or to some other place entirely, but he had grown used to them. It was a childhood companion, a presence without a name. He would lie awake at times, small hands folded beneath his cheek, wondering what it meant that silence itself seemed to speak. Others heard creaks, wind, or nothing at all. But for him, the silence carried voices that didn't quite form words, only feelings. They sang of patience, of waiting, of something tender lingering at the edges of the world. And in his own quiet way, he believed the whispers cared for him. It felt like they leaned close to make sure he was never truly alone. There was a shadow that lingered by the lamp in the corner of the room. At first he was afraid, as all children are when shapes refuse to behave like ordinary furniture. But over time, the shadow revealed a softer nature. It swayed gently, never harsh, as if rocking itself to sleep. He began to speak to it, though no one else knew. He told it about his days, about the neighbor's dog that barked at clouds, about the sandwich he once dropped in the dirt, but ate anyway, about the little dreams he carried but had no words for. The shadow listened, and in the strange stillness of those nights he felt heard. His parents never noticed. They thought him quiet, withdrawn, content in solitude. They couldn't have known that he carried whole conversations with the dark, and that the silence nurtured him more gently than words ever could. If they had asked, he might not have known how to explain it. Children rarely do. He simply trusted what he felt. The world inside him was large, and the world outside often felt too small to hold it. One evening, during a storm that rattled the windows, the whispers grew clearer. They were not words, not in the way books taught them, but he sensed something like reassurance. It was as though the silence was telling him, "The world is wide, and you will see it in ways others cannot." He curled into the blanket, listening with his whole body, and believed it without question. When thunder rolled across the sky, he did not flinch. The shadows swayed in rhythm, and together they waited for sleep to arrive. School was harder. The boy found himself staring out the window too long, or tilting his head as if he were listening to something others couldn't hear. Teachers thought he was distracted. Other children teased him gently, then harshly, when he failed to join their noisy games. He wasn't angry with them. He only wished they could hear the hidden songs, the sighs tucked between moments, the little melodies that silence hummed when no one paid attention. If they could, perhaps they would sit with him in the corner and simply listen. One day, a girl with untidy hair and ink-stained fingers sat beside him. She didn't speak at first, just drew small spirals in the margins of her notebook. He glanced at her, then away, afraid to disturb her quiet. And then, as the class droned on, she began to hum, softly, almost under her breath. The notes were uncertain, like a lullaby she was inventing as she went along. His chest tightened. It wasn't the same as the whispers he knew, but it carried the same gentleness. Without realizing, he smiled. She caught it, and for the first time he felt that someone else might understand. They didn't talk much in those early days. Words felt too heavy between them. Instead, she would hum, and he would listen, and together they created a silence that was not empty, but shared. Sometimes he wondered if she could hear what he heard, the sighs of the walls, the patient rocking of shadows, but he never asked. It was enough that she existed beside him, proof that not all silences had to be solitary. The house at night welcomed her presence too. Once she visited for a study session that turned into nothing more than scattered pages and laughter, hushed so his parents wouldn't notice. When she left, the boy returned to his room, and the silence seemed warmer, almost approving. The shadow swayed as though bowing. He whispered to it about her, about the humming, about how perhaps he was not as alone as he thought. The silence answered in its way, softer creaks, slower rhythms, the steady comfort of being held. Still, the boy often wrestled with doubt. Was it strange to live with such company? Were the whispers real, or had he invented them out of loneliness? Sometimes he worried he was broken in ways others weren't. But then he remembered the storm, the way the silence had soothed him, the way the shadow never left. And he thought, maybe brokenness could be beautiful if it made room for gentleness. Years seemed both long and short. Seasons shifted, and the boy grew taller, his voice carrying new weight. Yet at night, lying in bed, he remained the same child listening to the hush between sounds. He still spoke to the shadow, though his words grew more thoughtful, slower. He told it about questions that had no answers, about the way people hurried through life without noticing the pauses, about how he wished he could stretch moments like fabric and rest inside them. The shadow rocked, the silence hummed, and he felt understood. One winter evening, the girl returned with a tune she had written down. She played it softly on a worn instrument, and he listened, wide-eyed. The melody sounded eerily like the hush he had known all his life. When it ended, he said nothing. He only placed his hand over his chest, where the whispers lived, and smiled at her. She smiled back, as though they had shared something sacred. In that moment, the silence in the house grew vast and tender, as if blessing them both, and though he could not name it then, a truth was blooming. The silence that shaped him was not meant to keep him apart, but to guide him toward others who carried their own quiet music. It was not loneliness, but preparation, not emptiness, but a doorway. That night, as he drifted to sleep, the shadow stretched taller than usual, swaying gently like a lullaby in motion. The silence held him as it always had. He thought he heard it whisper, "You are never truly alone." And with that thought, his eyes closed. The house exhaled, the lamps dimmed, the whispers continued, soft and unhurried, carrying him into dreams. He never forgot that first moment of connection, when someone else's song seemed to echo the whispers he had known all his life. After that evening, the girl returned often, her ink-stained fingers carrying sheets of scribbles, fragments of melodies, and little sketches that spilled out of her mind. She spoke more with her humming than with her words, yet somehow he understood her more deeply than anyone else. Their friendship did not blossom in laughter and loud declarations. It unfolded quietly, like a flower opening under the moon. In those days, childhood was a mixture of strangeness and ordinary rituals. The boy still listened to the hush that lived in corners, still watched the shadow by the lamp as though it were an old guardian, but now his solitude was different. It had softened. He no longer felt like he was carrying a secret too heavy for the world. The girl's presence proved that even silence could be shared. They spent afternoons on the steps. Outside the house, a notebook balanced between them. She would sketch crooked stars while he tried to describe the sounds only he could hear. His words stumbled often, coming out clumsy, half-formed, like pebbles tossed into still water. Yet she never laughed. She tilted her head, eyes bright, as though listening for the echoes themselves. Sometimes she would pause, close her eyes, and hum along to the rhythm of his sentences, matching the unspoken music. In those moments he felt less like a strange boy and more like someone belonging. The shadow in his room seemed to approve of her. On the nights after she visited, it swayed more gently than usual, and the silence felt warmer. He began to think of the shadow less as something unknown and more as part of his story. A quiet elder nodding in the background, guiding him without words. He wondered if she could see it too, but he kept the thought tucked away. Some things felt too fragile to share. One evening, she showed him a lullaby she had been working on. The notes were uneven, a little hesitant, but full of tenderness. She called it the Lantern Song. He asked why, and she only smiled, pointing at the street lamp outside that flickered stubbornly each night, refusing to go dark. "Some lights don't want to be forgotten," she said. He thought about that lamp, about the shadow by his own, about the whispers that never left him, and he felt something stirring inside. Maybe none of these small companions wanted to be forgotten either. Maybe they were lanterns too. At school, the two of them began to drift together like twin leaves carried by the same slow current. Other children teased less. Now, or perhaps he noticed less, shielded by the quiet certainty of her presence. They sat at the back of the classroom, exchanging sketches and quiet hums, building a language no one else needed to understand. It was not rebellion. It was survival, and more than that, it was belonging. The boy still wrestled with the strangeness of his gift. There were times when the whispers grew so strong that he would pause mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, listening to something no one else could hear. She never mocked him for it. Instead, she would wait, sometimes humming a single note as if to hold the space open for him. He began to think of her as part of the silence, not separate from it, but woven into its fabric. One late afternoon, rain pattered softly on the windows while they worked on a story together. She wrote words, he added quiet details, and together they created a tale about a boy who carried silence in his pockets like stones, and a girl who strung songs from those stones like necklaces. They laughed quietly at the oddness of it, but when they finished, they both stared at the page, recognizing something true. It was not just a story. It was a mirror. That night, he told the shadow about it. He spoke of the boy with silence and the girl with songs of how they made something whole from things others overlooked. The shadow swayed slowly, as though in approval. For the first time, he felt proud of the whispers, not burdened by them. They were not a curse. They were a gift, one that helped him see the world in ways others could not. Still, doubts returned from time to time, as they often do. He would lie awake, wondering if the girl would grow tired of him, if she would drift toward louder friendships, leaving him alone again with his half-understood companions. When those thoughts pressed too hard, he listened more carefully to the silence, waiting for its reassurance. It always came, sometimes in the creak of the floorboards, sometimes in the hush of the wind against the glass, sometimes in the gentle sway of the shadow. "You are not alone," it seemed to say, again and again. Seasons shifted slowly, the air grew, cooler, then warmer, then cool again, and each change carried its own music. The girl noticed it too. She said the silence in autumn sounded different from the silence in spring. He smiled, grateful that she could sense such subtleties, even if she didn't hear them the way he did. They began to mark the seasons not by calendars, but by the character of silence itself. One evening in early winter, the two of them lit a candle and placed it near the window. They watched the flame flicker, reflecting against the glass, doubling itself. "Every light makes more of itself when it's mirrored," she whispered. He thought about how his silence had mirrored itself in her music, how her humming had become the echo he never knew he needed. He wanted to tell her this, but words felt too fragile, too easily broken. So instead, he simply sat beside her, letting the silence stretch wide enough to hold them both. Later that night, lying in his bed, he thought about the lantern in the street, the candle in the window, the shadow by his lamp, and the girl with her hums. A thread connected them all, invisible but strong. He realized he was part of something larger than himself, something tender and unhurried. And though he didn't know where it would lead, he felt no need to rush. The whispers that night were softer than usual, more like a lullaby than a conversation. They wrapped around him as he drifted into sleep, whispering of journeys that had not yet begun, friendships that would grow, and a legacy that might one day be remembered. He didn't need to understand it all. It was enough to feel the warmth of belonging, the comfort of knowing that silence had chosen him, and that he had chosen it back. The house seemed to sigh in agreement. Shadows stretched, lamps flickered, and the silence settled like a blanket, carrying him gently into dreams where the girl's humming still played, where lanterns never went out, and where even the quietest of companions shone with their own kind of light. The first glimpse of the multiverse did not arrive with noise or spectacle. It came quietly in the stillness between moments, as though it had always been there, waiting for him to notice. He was older now, though still young enough to measure time by seasons rather than years. The girl remained by his side often, humming and sketching, while the shadow kept its silent vigil in the corner of his room. Life seemed steady, predictable in its own gentle rhythm. And yet one night the silence deepened into something more. It happened in the half-sleep that comes just before dreams. He had been lying awake, listening to the familiar hush of the house, when suddenly the air seemed to fold inward. The walls stretched, not outward, but in, as though the room itself was exhaling a long-hidden secret. The whispers grew clearer, layered upon each other like ripples on water. They carried no words, only sensations, vastness, distance, closeness, all at once. He felt as though he had stumbled to the edge of something immense. At first, he thought it was another dream, but the clarity was too sharp. He could feel the grain of the wooden floor beneath his fingers, smell the faint wax of the candle his mother had blown out earlier, and yet his sight was filled with something far larger. Before him opened what looked like a garden. though it stretched endlessly, each path winding into colors he had never seen. The silence was alive there, not hushed, but blooming. He did not walk into it. He simply was inside it, as if his breath had carried him over some invisible threshold. Lanterns floated above the pathways, not bound by strings or poles. Each glowed, with a different shade, soft and patient, like hearts beating in slow unison. Some shimmered pale blue, others gold. A few pulsed with dim silver light, as though tired but still alight. He felt drawn to them, not with urgency, but with reverence. Each lantern seemed to hum a note too delicate for ears, a note that settled inside the chest. The girl's humming rose in his memory then, weaving itself into the fabric of that strange place. He thought of her, and wondered if she, too, might one day see this. The thought comforted him. For a moment he imagined walking those endless paths with her at his side, sketchbook in hand, humming as lanterns nodded overhead. The shadow was there too, though in a different form. Instead of swaying in one corner, it stretched long across the paths, keeping pace with him. It felt older there, not just a shape on his wall, but a traveller who had been waiting for him. He sensed no danger, only companionship. Together they lingered in the garden, unhurried, listening to the silence bloom into colours. He did not know how long he stayed. Time in that place was not measured in minutes, but in breaths, in heartbeats. Eventually, though, the air folded back the way it had unfolded. The lanterns dimmed, the paths dissolved into dark. The shadow shrank again into its familiar corner. He opened his eyes to find himself in his bed, blanket pulled close, the candle long extinguished. For a moment he doubted it had happened at all. And then he heard it, the faint echo of those unearthly hums still resonating in his chest. The next day he tried to tell the girl. His words stumbled, tripping over themselves, but she listened, with her head tilted as always, eyes intent. When he described the lanterns, she quickly sketched them, each with a different glow. When he spoke of the garden, she filled her page with spirals of paths, curling into infinity. He grew quiet, embarrassed, unsure if she thought him foolish. But when she finished, she closed the notebook softly and said, "I believe you." It was the first time anyone had spoken those words about his strangeness. He carried them with him all day, repeating them silently. "I believe you." It was enough to convince him that the experience was not a dream, but something more. He did not need proof. Belief was enough. That evening he waited for the silence to bloom again. It did not. Nights passed, each filled with ordinary whispers and the steady swaying of the shadow, but no lanterns, no garden. He began to wonder if the multiverse only revealed itself when it wished, not when he called. That thought humbled him. He realized this gift was not his to control, but to receive, like rain or starlight. Still he longed to return. Sometimes he and the girl would sit outside beneath the stubborn street lamp, and he would imagine its glow as one of the lanterns from the garden. She seemed to sense this. Without being asked, she began to hum the lantern song more often, her voice soft under the night sky. He never told her how much it meant to him, but he suspected she knew. One winter's night, the whispers grew louder. Again, not opening the garden fully, but enough for him to feel the edges of it. This time, he placed his hand on the window pane, tracing the condensation with his fingertip. In the reflection of the glass, he thought he saw a flicker, one of the lanterns, pale blue and patient, floating just beyond reach. He whispered a "thank you," not sure if anyone was listening, and the flicker answered by lingering a moment longer before fading. The boy learned patience from those nights. He learned that not every silence carried revelations, that sometimes it was simply silence. And yet, knowing the multiverse existed, even if hidden, gave him comfort. Life felt larger now. Every small moment, a candle flame, a drifting shadow, a girl's humming, might be part of something infinite. He carried this truth quietly. He did not try to explain it to others. It was enough that the girl believed, enough that the shadow kept him company, enough that lanterns sometimes flickered in the edge of his dreams. And as he grew, this secret, knowledge gave him a gentleness others noticed but could not name. Teachers remarked on his patience. Neighbors thought him thoughtful. Few understood that his calmness came not from lack of feeling, but from carrying the weight of infinite paths within him. On nights when the garden did not return, he still found wonder in small things. The hush of snow against the earth, the rhythm of rain against the roof, the fragile flame of a single candle. Each, he thought, was its own universe, its own lantern. Perhaps the multiverse was not only out there, but folded into every moment of here. Perhaps the secret of the lanterns was not distance but attention, and so with the patience of a child already learning to live like an elder, he waited. He trusted the silence, trusted the shadow, trusted that the garden would open again when the time was right. And when he closed his eyes each night, he carried the memory of those endless paths, those floating lanterns, knowing they had already changed him forever. As seasons turned once more, he began to notice that his thoughts could do something unusual, something that felt like stretching. It was not his body that changed, but the way his mind could reach. When he listened closely to silence, he could let his thoughts drift outward, soft and elastic, as though unrolling a fabric across the air. He could sense things farther away than sound should allow. A candle flickering in another room, the slow footsteps of his father in the hallway, the weight of the sky pressing gently against the house. He stretched his thoughts and felt the world breathe back. At first he was frightened, unsure if he was trespassing into places he shouldn't. But the whispers reassured him, their tones calm, reminding him that gentleness could go anywhere without causing harm. He practiced alone in the evenings, lying on the floor of his room, arms spread as if to anchor himself. The shadow rocked quietly in the corner, patient as always. With each breath he extended further, brushing against the silence, beyond the walls, then reeling himself back in. The girl noticed the difference before he told her. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the flickering street lamp, she tilted her head and asked, "Why do you always look like you're listening to something far away?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain, then simply said, "Because I am." She didn't laugh. She only nodded, humming softly, as if to join him in whatever distance he was reaching for. His strange stretching soon became more than just a trick. It became a way of caring. He realized he could stretch toward people without touching them, sensing their moods the way one senses weather. His mother, moving through the kitchen, sometimes carried a tightness he could feel, even when she smiled. His father, quiet and stern, carried a heaviness he didn't put into words. When the boy stretched his thoughts toward them, he felt the unspoken weight they bore. He could not change it, but he could acknowledge it, silently. That alone felt like a gift. With the girl, it was different. When he stretched toward her, he found melodies waiting, as though her thoughts were always halfway to music. He began to hum with her, shyly at first, letting his notes stumble over hers. She laughed at his clumsiness, but not unkindly, and encouraged him to keep trying. It was in those shared hums that he discovered stretching wasn't just about sensing, it was also about joining. His thoughts could blend with hers, weaving into harmony. One late summer night, as crickets whispered outside, he stretched further than he ever had. He felt the whole neighborhood breathing, houses leaning against each other, trees sighing, stars humming faintly overhead. It was overwhelming, too vast for his young heart to carry. But then he thought of the lantern garden, of the endless paths glowing softly, and the vastness no longer frightened him. It felt familiar, as though this stretching was the same language he had once heard, spoken by silence itself. There were moments when the gift slipped into daily life without warning. He would be walking home from school and suddenly feel the sadness of a stranger passing by. Or he would sense the restlessness of birds before a storm, stretching not just into people, but into all living things. At times, it was exhausting. At other times, it felt like a secret map of the world written only for him. The girl became his anchor. When the stretching grew too heavy, when the emotions of others pressed too sharply, she would hum the lantern song and bring him back. He told her once, in a voice quieter than a whisper, "You are the reason I don't get lost." She blushed, but didn't answer, only hummed louder until his chest eased and the weight lightened. The shadow, too, seemed aware of his new ability. It swayed more purposefully now, as if echoing the rhythm of his stretches. Some nights it appeared longer, taller, as though growing with him. He began to think of it less as a watcher and more as a guide, a guardian not of his body but of his gift. His parents still did not know. To them he was simply quiet, thoughtful, a boy who preferred corners to crowds. They worried sometimes, but they did not ask too many questions. Perhaps they believed he would grow out of his strangeness. Perhaps they thought silence was only shyness. He let them think it. Some truths, he felt, were not ready to be spoken aloud. The stretching taught him another lesson as well, that gentleness mattered. If he reached too quickly, he could startle the silence. But if he stretched slowly, carefully, like unfolding cloth, the world welcomed him. It reminded him of the way one holds a fragile object, not to claim it, but to keep it safe. He realized that empathy was not so different. To feel another's weight was not to take it, but to hold it with care. One day the girl asked if he could teach her. He hesitated, unsure if such a gift could be shared. But he guided her through the only steps he knew. Sitting still, breathing slow, listening with more than ears. She closed her eyes, humming softly, and though she did not stretch as he did, she smiled. "I think I can almost feel it," she said. That was enough. Even if her stretching was different, it was theirs together. As autumn returned, he found comfort in his growing skill. He no longer feared it. Instead, he treated it like a delicate instrument, one that required patience and humility. He used it not to pry into others, but to understand them more tenderly. When classmates laughed too loudly, he stretched and found that their laughter was sometimes hollow. When the teacher sighed at her desk, he stretched and felt her weariness, softened by hope. He carried these discoveries quietly, never speaking them, but letting them shape his kindness. The whispers in the house grew gentler with his growth, as though pleased. The shadow kept watch, steady as ever. The girl remained his closest companion, sketching, humming, believing. Together they were learning that silence was not emptiness, but a vast, patient teacher. And on certain nights when the stretching reached far enough, he felt once more the faint glow of lanterns in the distance, reminders that the multiverse was not gone, only waiting. He did not rush toward it, he let it be. And with that patience he felt himself growing, not in power but in softness, in the kind of strength that comes from gentleness. The mentor arrived without announcement, as mentors often do. He was not a teacher in the formal sense, nor a figure, sent by destiny with clear instructions. He was simply there one day, an older man who seemed to carry pauses in his voice like treasures. He lived down the street in a house with peeling paint and a garden that always smelled faintly of rain, even in dry seasons. To most, he was just another neighbor, quiet and ordinary. But the boy noticed something different in him. The man's silences were alive, layered in the same way his own had always been. Their first meeting was unremarkable on the surface. The boy had been walking home, stretching his thoughts absent-mindedly, when he brushed against a silence that felt strangely familiar. It was steady, calm and vast, as though it contained entire oceans. Startled, he turned his head and found the man sitting on his porch, sipping tea from a chipped mug. The man looked at him, not with surprise, but with a quiet knowing, as though he had been waiting. "Listening, are you?" the man asked, his voice low and slow, as if each word carried weight. The boy froze, unsure how to answer. Few people ever noticed when he stretched his thoughts, but the man only smiled faintly, setting his mug down, and added, "It's a good thing to do. The world doesn't mind being heard." That was the beginning. The boy began to visit the man's porch often, sometimes with the girl, sometimes alone. The man never offered lectures or instructions. Instead, he spoke in pauses, in questions that lingered, in stories that seemed to end halfway. At first, this confused the boy, who had grown used to silence giving him answers in feelings rather than riddles. But over time, he began to understand. The mentor wasn't there to give answers. He was there to teach him how to hold the questions. On one such visit, the man said, "Do you know why silence matters?" The boy hesitated, then offered, "Because it holds things we cannot hear." The man nodded slowly, letting the pause stretch before replying. "And because it asks nothing of us. It waits. Few things in this world wait without demanding." The girl, sitting cross-legged with her notebook, sketched the man's wrinkled hands as he spoke. She liked to capture moments in lines, while the boy liked to hold them in feelings. Together they gathered his words like lanterns, storing them, without fully knowing how bright they would burn later. The mentor often asked the boy to sit quietly, not stretching, not reaching, only breathing. At first it was difficult. His gift made him restless, eager to extend outward, to sense more. But the man would shake his head gently. "Not every silence is meant to be filled," he said. "Some are meant to be shared." And so the boy learned the art of simply sitting. The three of them would pass entire afternoons in stillness, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the girl's occasional hum. These moments left the boy feeling fuller than any long conversation could. There was one evening the boy never forgot. The sun had dipped low, painting the street in pale orange. The man handed him a small stone, smooth and grey, and said, "This stone has been here longer than you, longer than me. Hold it. Feel how quiet it is. That's the kind of silence you should aim for. Unmoving, but not empty. Present, without shouting." The boy turned the stone in his palm and felt its stillness. He carried it home and placed it by his lamp beside the shadow. It became another companion, another reminder, the Shadow itself seemed to acknowledge the mentor. On nights after the boy's visits, it swayed with a steadier rhythm, as if echoing the man's presence. The whispers, too, seemed more patient, less hurried, as though they approved of this new guidance. The boy realized then that the silence had not only chosen him, but had also placed people in his path who could help him learn its language. The mentor never called himself a teacher. When the boy once tried to thank him for the lessons, he only chuckled. "Lessons? No, I'm just keeping you company while you listen. The rest is already inside you." It was a simple truth, but it stayed with the boy, giving him courage whenever doubt returned. The girl grew fond of the man as well. She filled page after page with sketches of his porch, his garden, his face lit by lantern light. She said he reminded her of the lanterns in the boy's strange garden, each pause in his voice aglow, each silence a pathway. Together, the three of them formed a quiet circle, bound not by loud declarations, but by shared presence. One rainy afternoon, as droplets patterned the wooden railing, the man said, "One day you'll find that silence does not always answer. Sometimes it only sits with you. And that is its answer." The boy thought about that for a long time. It comforted him, though he didn't fully know why. With each visit, the boy felt his stretching soften. It was no longer something he pushed outward. It became something he allowed, something he unfolded gently, like placing fabric on a table. The man's pauses taught him patience, restraint, and the grace of listening without grasping. At home, his parents still noticed nothing unusual. To them, he was simply calmer now, more settled, less restless. They were relieved. The boys smiled at their relief, but did not explain. Some secrets were not meant to be spoken, only lived. One night, after leaving the mentor's porch, he lay in bed and stretched his thoughts not outward, but inward. For the first time, he listened not to the silence of the house, not to the hum of lanterns in distant gardens, but to the silence inside himself. It startled him to find that it was there, steady and vast, just as the man had said. He realized then that his gift was not about reaching beyond himself. It was about remembering that he, too, carried silence. The shadow swayed approvingly. The whispers hummed gently. And in the stillness of that night, the boy felt whole. Seasons slipped quietly around the boy, each carrying its own hush. Autumn laid gentle carpets of leaves across the porch where he sat with the mentor. Winter draped the garden in pale silence, muffling even the sound of footsteps. Spring returned with a rush of rain and green, and summer hummed softly in warm evenings. Through it all, the boy continued to listen, stretching and folding his gift in new ways, each day learning that silence had many forms, some tender, some weighty, some hidden so deeply that they could only be sensed by waiting. It was during one spring morning that something changed. The girl arrived earlier than usual, her notebook tucked under her arm, her hair damp from a sudden shower. She looked brighter, as though she had been carrying a secret. When the boy asked, she only smiled and said, "I've been hearing my own silence." He tilted his head, curious, and she explained, "Not like yours, not with stretching. But when I draw, sometimes I hear the spaces between lines. They hum, as though the page is alive. Maybe it's not silence, exactly, but it feels close." The boy listened with quiet awe. For so long he had thought his gift was a lonely one, but here was proof that silence could visit others in its own ways. It did not belong to him alone. He felt lighter knowing this. Together they showed the mentor her drawings, filled with soft shadows and empty spaces, and the man nodded. "Good," he said. "Silence always finds ways to reveal itself, sometimes through sound, sometimes through space. You two are learning to see the same thing with different eyes." The boy began to notice how their silences wove together. His stretched into the world like threads, while hers settled on the page in shapes and outlines. They did not always speak of it, but when their eyes met, they knew they were sharing the same secret. Two branches of the same tree swaying in different winds. One summer night, lying in the grass beside her, he told her something he had never said aloud. "When I stretch too far, I sometimes feel like I'll dissolve, as though I'll become only silence, no longer myself." He spoke slowly, the words trembling on his tongue. She turned her head to look at him, her gaze steady. "And what would be so bad about that?" she asked softly. He blinked, startled, and she smiled. "If you became silent, you'd still be here. I would still find you in the pauses." Her words stayed with him for weeks. They were both comforting and frightening. Could a person really disappear into silence and still be found? He wasn't sure, but he trusted her enough to believe it might be true. Their bond deepened, not through confessions or dramatic promises, but through shared stillness. She would sketch while he listened. Sometimes she would read aloud, her voice weaving through the hush, and he would stretch gently to catch the echoes. They walked slowly through fields, along streams, into quiet groves where even the birds seemed to respect their reverence. Always there was the feeling of being held by something larger, something unseen, as if silence itself blessed their companionship. One evening, the mentor joined them in the grove. He carried no lantern, yet the fading light seemed to follow him. Sitting down on the grass, he spoke in that low, deliberate tone. "Every silence you carry is also a bond. You cannot hold it alone forever. Sooner or later, it begins to lean, to rest against another." He looked at them with a gentle knowing, then fell quiet, allowing his words to echo inwardly. The boy thought of how his silence leaned toward hers, how hers leaned toward him. He realized then that his gift was not about keeping silence, but sharing it. It was not only a private refuge, but also a bridge. The mentor had shown him one path, the girl another. Both were parts of the same whole. As months passed, he found himself stretching differently. No longer seeking far-off whispers or endless depths, he reached for her presence, her quiet strength. Sometimes he thought he could feel her even when she wasn't there, as though her drawings left traces in the silence around him. Once when he told her this, she simply laughed softly and said, "Then maybe I am stretching too?" Their closeness was not without shadows. Sometimes the boy's gift still overwhelmed him. On nights when the whispers grew too heavy, he withdrew into himself, afraid to share the weight. But she noticed anyway. She would sit beside him without questions, sketching by candlelight until his breathing steadied. Her patience reminded him of the mentor's pauses, only gentler, woven with warmth. One night he whispered to her, "Do you ever fear the silences might fade?" She closed her notebook, resting it on her knees. "No," she said after a pause. "Silence is like the sky. Even when you can't see it, it's always there. You don't lose it. You just forget to look up." Those words soothed him more deeply than she could have known. He carried them like the stone the mentor had given him, like the lanterns he once dreamed of in the garden. They became a guiding phrase whenever doubt returned. The mentor watched their bond with quiet approval. Sometimes he would smile faintly when he saw them together, saying nothing, only letting the silence between them speak. It was a blessing in its own way. As another autumn arrived, the boy realized how much he had changed. His gift was no longer something that marked him as separate. It was something that connected him to the mentor, to the girl, to the very air around him. And in that connection he felt less alone. One evening, walking home under a sky brushed with stars, the girl slipped her hand into his. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was steady, vast, and luminous. It was not the silence of absence, nor the silence of fear. It was the silence of belonging. The boy knew then that his journey was not about stretching endlessly outward. It was about finding the people with whom silence could rest, unbroken and shared. That night, as he lay in bed, the shadow on his wall swayed gently, and the whispers hummed like a lullaby. For the first time, he did not listen outward. He only breathed, holding the silence that belonged to both of them. And in that stillness he felt utterly at peace. The days grew slower, as though time itself had chosen to soften its edges. The boy noticed how the air seemed to move differently, not rushing, not pulling, simply flowing as if it wanted to be listened to. He had grown used to the company of silence, but now he realized that silence itself was changing. It no longer felt like something outside him, waiting to be reached. It had begun to live within him, steady and quiet, like breath. The mentor saw it too. One afternoon, as the three of them sat together near the garden, he said in his calm, almost whispering voice, "Silence has seasons. You have learned its spring and summer. Now it will show you autumn." Neither the boy nor the girl asked what he meant. They had grown used to his words unfolding slowly, like seeds that took their time to open. Instead, they let his sentence rest between them like a leaf falling gently to the ground. Autumn came with a different kind of hush. The world was not empty but full of endings. Leaves scattered in careful spirals. The air carried the scent of wood smoke, and nights grew earlier. The boy felt those endings quietly. When he stretched, the whispers he reached carried more weight, as though they were tired or remembering too much. At first, it unsettled him, but then, with the girl beside him, he began to see that endings were simply another way of speaking. They, too, were a language of silence. One evening, they walked to the grove, where shadows gathered softly under branches now half bare. The boy closed his eyes and stretched. The whispers that came were low, deep, and filled with something he could only call longing. He listened carefully, then opened his eyes and said, "They sound like they are saying goodbye." The girl pressed her drawing pad to her chest. "Then maybe you are hearing the season itself," she replied. "Goodbyes can be beautiful too." She began sketching leaves in her notebook, not whole trees, not branches heavy with life, but leaves already falling, caught in the moment of drifting. She told him that silence could be captured in that motion, in the soft pause before a leaf touched the ground. He watched her hands move gently, almost reverently, and for the first time he understood that her drawings were not only pictures. They were ways of keeping silence alive when words were too heavy. The mentor visited less often during those weeks, leaving them more time alone. But when he did appear, he spoke of deeper things. "Silence will not always be gentle," he told them once. "It can ache. It can press on you. But if you trust it, it will also heal. Do not fear its weight. Let it rest upon you until it shows you what it carries. The boy thought about this long into the night. He felt the ache already in the whispers that lingered too long, in the heaviness of quiet that seemed to press against his chest. But he also trusted the mentor, and so he did not resist it. There were nights when the boy woke from dreams where he was nothing but silence, not stretched, not whispering, only a stillness, vast and endless. At first, these dreams frightened him, as though he were being erased, but slowly he began to see them differently. When he told the girl, she nodded softly. "Maybe those dreams are showing you the place silence comes from," she said. "Not to take you away, but to remind you what you are part of." Together they made a ritual of walking at twilight. They would sit by the water's edge, watching the sky darken, watching the world fold into night. Neither of them spoke much. Words seemed too loud, too heavy for those hours. Instead, they simply shared the quiet. Sometimes she would hum softly, not a melody, just a breath turned into sound. He found comfort in that hum, as though it stitched the edges of silence together, keeping them close. On one of those evenings, he asked her, "Do you think silence remembers us the way we remember it?" She smiled faintly, her eyes on the fading horizon. "Yes," she whispered. "It remembers every pause, every unspoken thought, every kindness that needed no words. That's how it grows. That's how it holds us when we are too tired to hold ourselves." Her answer made him feel small, but not in a painful way. Small like a star in a sky of endless stars, small like a leaf in a forest that would keep living after the leaf fell. It was a humbling thought, but also a gentle one. The mentor gave them fewer teachings now, letting their silences guide them more than his voice. But once, on a particularly still night, he said, "You are both learning what few ever do. That silence is not empty. It is full. It holds every echo, every memory, every love. To walk with silence is to walk with all that has ever been." His words sank into them like rain, soaking deep, leaving behind a quiet shine. The boy carried those words as he grew into the cooler months. He noticed how silence was not only around him, but between him and the people he loved. Between himself and the girl, it was tender. Between himself and the mentor, it was steady. And within himself, it was learning to be gentle, even when it was heavy. Winter approached again. Snow returned, blanketing the earth in white silence. The boy lay awake one night, listening to the stillness outside, and he realized he no longer feared it. The silence that once stretched like a vast, unreachable horizon now felt like a home. And in that home, there was room for everything: the mentor's wisdom, the girl's drawings, his own quiet heart. As he drifted into sleep, he felt the whispers soften, like lullabies folding around him. They no longer pulled, they no longer pressed. They simply stayed, steady and calm. For the first time, he realized that he was not listening to silence. He was becoming it, carrying it, shaping it with every breath. And in that realization, he felt a peace that needed no words at all. The year turned again, as years always do, and the boy began to notice how time was not a line, but a circle. Each season carried traces of the one before it, like echoes hidden within new songs. He would stretch and feel how the whispers remembered, how winter carried the weight of autumn's goodbyes, how spring held the breath of winter's silence. It comforted him, this circular rhythm. It made him feel less alone, as though everything he was experiencing had been lived before and would be lived again in gentle repetition. The girl, too, noticed the circles. She began drawing them in her notebook, rings around trees, ripples in ponds, the round glow of lanterns they lit at night. Sometimes she would hold up a page to show him and smile. "It all comes back," she would say, and he would nod because he had begun to believe it. One afternoon they wandered farther than usual, past the garden, past the grove, to a hill where the wind sang in soft, shifting tones. The boy stretched, listening, and what came back was different. The whispers were not heavy, not aching like autumn's, nor were they soft like spring's. They were layered, one over another, as though the silence itself was telling him that stories could be retold without ending. He looked at the girl, and she seemed to sense it too, for she sketched a spiral across her page, lines circling inward until they touched. They sat there for hours, letting the wind carry its layered hush across them. The boy thought about how silence was not only in the seasons but in people too. The mentor carried an old silence, worn and steady, shaped by years. The girl carried a tender silence, bright and alive, still growing. And he himself carried a silence that was learning to listen, learning to bend, learning to stretch without breaking. That evening, when they returned, the mentor was waiting. His eyes were kind, though there was something in them the boy could not name. A softness, perhaps, or maybe a sadness. "You are beginning to understand," the mentor said, quietly. "Silence is not the absence of time. It is what holds time together. Every circle, every return rests within it." The boy wanted to ask what that meant, but he knew by now that some answers were not meant to be hurried. So he simply let it wait. The words settle as one might let snow settle over the ground. Days passed gently. The boy found himself watching people more closely, noticing how silence shaped them. Some filled every pause with words, as if afraid of what they might hear otherwise. Others moved slowly, letting their silence linger like shadows behind them. He began to see that silence revealed truth more clearly than speech ever could. The girl seemed to understand this too. She began to draw not only what she saw, but also what she felt in the silences around her. An unfinished circle, a half-open door, a path that disappeared into mist. One night, as they sat by the fire, the girl looked at him and said softly, "Do you ever wonder if silence listens back?" He thought for a moment, then answered, "Maybe it does. Maybe that's why it feels so full. Maybe it holds every word we've never spoken." She lowered her eyes and a faint smile touched her lips. "Then I hope it keeps them safe," she whispered. The boy could not explain why, but her words stayed with him. He began to stretch differently after that, not only to hear the whispers, but to offer something back. He would let his breath linger in the space between movements, as though giving silence a gift. He never knew if silence accepted it, but he liked to imagine that it did. There was a night when the three of them sat together beneath the stars. The air was cool, the ground soft with early dew. None of them spoke for a long time. The mentor closed his eyes, the girl rested her head on her knees, and the boy stretched, just enough to feel the sky's hush pressing gently against him. It was in that stillness that he understood something simple yet vast. Silence was not something he had to find. It was something he had to join. The mentor opened his eyes then, as if he had heard the thought. "Silence is the oldest companion," he said. "It was here before us, and it will remain after us. but for a little while we are allowed to walk with it. That is enough." His voice was so calm, so certain, that the boy felt no need to reply. He only let the words sink into him like rain into earth. The girl reached out and touched his sleeve lightly, her hand lingering there. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own language, and he had grown fluent, enough to understand it. He thought then of all the people he would meet in his life, of how some would speak endlessly and some would hardly speak at all, and he hoped he would remember that silence was always there, waiting to be heard. That night, as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed of circles again. Circles within circles, spirals that folded into themselves, echoes that returned softer each time. He dreamed that silence was a vast ocean, and every sound was a ripple upon its surface, fading but never lost. When he woke, the dream still clung to him like a gentle mist, and he felt a quiet gratitude for it. The seasons turned again, as seasons always do. Spring would come, then summer, then autumn, then winter. But the boy no longer measured time in days or months. He measured it in silences. The hush of a leaf falling, the pause before a word was spoken, the breath between one thought and the next. And each silence seemed to carry him deeper, teaching him that the quiet was not empty at all. It was everything. The morning arrived in gentle layers, soft grey folding into pale gold, like a sigh unravelling across the sky. The boy woke early, before the girl and the mentor stirred, and stepped outside into the hush that clung to the earth. The air was cool against his skin, and he stretched just enough to listen. What returned was faint, quieter than usual, almost as if the silence itself was still waking from its own dreams. He stood there, breathing slowly, letting the stillness rest against him. It was not empty. It was full in its own way, like a vessel holding countless invisible things. When the girl emerged, she carried her notebook against her chest. Her hair was loose, falling into her eyes, and she brushed it back with the kind of absent-minded gesture that spoke of comfort and routine. She saw him standing there, stretching, and said softly, "What did you hear today?" He hesitated, then answered. It felt like silence wasn't ready to speak, like it wanted to linger a little longer. She nodded, as though she understood exactly, and opened her notebook to a blank page. She began sketching circles again, but this time the circles were faint, incomplete, like beginnings waiting for endings. The mentor joined them later, carrying a lantern, though the daylight had already begun to spread. He always carried it, as if to remind himself that even light needed to be guided sometimes. He set it down on a stone and said, "There are mornings when the world whispers less. Those are the mornings we are meant to listen harder." His voice was not instructive, not commanding. It was simply present, like the rustle of wind or the steady rhythm of footsteps. They walked together to the grove. The branches were heavy with blossoms now, white and trembling, as though each carried the memory of snow. The boy reached out and let a petal fall into his hand. It was so fragile that it seemed it might vanish if he breathed too heavily. He thought of how silence was like that too. Something you could hold, but only if you held it gently. As they sat among the blossoms, the girl began to hum. It was not a song, not something practiced or planned. It was more like a thread of sound. She had found within herself something soft enough to blend with the wind. The boy listened, stretching just enough to let the hum linger. What returned was faint but comforting, like warmth folded within coolness. He realized then that sound and silence were not enemies. They were companions, circling each other endlessly, each giving the other meaning. The mentor closed his eyes while the girl hummed. When she stopped, he opened them again and said, "There are silences that follow sound. Those are the most tender of all. They carry what was spoken or sung long after it fades." His words rested gently in the air, and the boy thought about all the sounds he had ever heard, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the crackle of fire. He realized that silence had always been there too, waiting to cradle them when they ended. That evening, they lit the lantern and placed it between them. Its glow was steady, not bright, but warm enough to make the shadows lean in close. The girl drew the lantern carefully in her notebook, capturing the way its light seemed to hold the dark without pushing it away. "It's like a small sun," she whispered. The boy smiled. "Or maybe a quiet star." The mentor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It is what it needs to be. Nothing more, nothing less." They sat long into the night, letting the lantern burn until its flame was small. The boy found himself watching the way the light faded. It did not vanish all at once. It softened, dimmed, leaned into the darkness. He thought it was beautiful, this gentle surrender. Perhaps silence was like that too, never abrupt, never harsh, but always folding into what came next. When the lantern finally flickered out, they remained together in the dark. No one spoke. The boy stretched into the night and felt the vast hush of the stars pressing gently against him. It was deeper than any silence he had known, wide and endless. It carried echoes he could not name, as though every life, every memory, every dream that had ever existed rested within it. He did not understand it fully, but he felt at peace. Later, as they prepared for rest, the girl touched his arm lightly. "Do you think silence remembers us?" she asked. He thought carefully before answering. "Maybe it remembers everything. Maybe that's why it feels so heavy sometimes. But maybe that weight is what keeps the world from drifting apart." She gave a small smile, the kind that said she would carry his words with her. Then she lay down, and the night folded over them all like a blanket. In his dreams, the boy found himself walking through endless circles. Each one was made of whispers, faint and fading, yet still present. He walked through them slowly, stretching now and then, and each time the circles shifted, opening paths he had not seen before. There was no hurry, no destination, only walking, only listening. And the deeper he walked, the softer everything became, until he felt as though he were dissolving into the silence itself. When he woke, dawn was breaking again. The girl was still asleep, the mentor still resting. The boy sat quietly, watching the light return, and felt something simple but profound settle in him. Silence was not something he carried, it was something that carried him. The morning stretched forward gently. The petals stirred, the lantern remained dark, the circles in the girl's notebook waited to be finished. And within it all, silence lingered, not absent, not empty, but steady, patient, kind. The boy rose with the hush of dawn, carrying the faint memory of his dream still folded inside him. It clung like a mist, drifting at the edges of his thoughts, half remembered, yet deeply felt. He stepped into the morning air, where the silence pressed close, not as absence, but as presence, like a companion who asked nothing yet gave everything. The world was washed in grey-blue light, soft and uncertain, and he felt himself moving more slowly, as though the earth itself wanted him to take his time. He walked to the grove where blossoms had begun to fall. The petals lay scattered across, the grass, pale fragments of something once whole. He bent to pick one up, holding it carefully between his fingers. It was fragile, paper-thin, and he wondered how long it would last before it dissolved into the soil. There was a kind of sorrow in its impermanence, but also a gentle comfort. The petal had not resisted its falling. It had simply let go, becoming part of the earth again. The girl joined him, her steps soft, her hair tousled from sleep. She carried her notebook as always, the pages filled with sketches and half-formed circles. She stood beside him and looked at the petal in his hand. "It doesn't seem sad," she whispered. "Just finished." He nodded slowly, realizing she was right. The blossom had not lost anything. It had only changed its form. He set the petal back down, letting the wind take it. The mentor appeared a little later, lantern in hand, though the daylight was already stretching across the horizon. He always brought it, as if to remind himself that light could belong anywhere. Even in brightness, he said nothing at first, only sat on a stone nearby and closed his eyes. They waited with him, letting the silence hold all three of them together. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and low. "We think of endings as falling away, but often they are beginnings disguised. A petal's fall makes room for fruit. A silence makes space for sound. Nothing leaves without leaving something behind." The boy stretched then, slowly, gently, until the silence reached back toward him. What returned was layered, like a murmur beneath the surface. It wasn't sound exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. It felt like the memory of laughter, the trace of voices that had once been. He let it linger, not trying to capture it, only letting it move through him. When he released his stretch, he exhaled deeply, and the silence folded around them again, more tender than before. The girl began to sketch the falling petals, but this time her circles curved into spirals. They weren't closed, they opened outward, as though each one was still moving, still unfolding. She didn't explain her drawing, but when the boy leaned close, he felt that the spirals said something words couldn't. They suggested motion, continuation, the way life and silence were always spiraling into one another. That night, when they lit the lantern, the glow seemed softer than before. The boy thought it looked like a memory more than a flame. They gathered around it, the mentor tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick, the girl adding lines to her spirals, and the boys simply watching the light shift across their faces. The mentor said quietly, "Do you notice how flame bends when wind passes? It does not resist, it leans, then returns, yet it is never broken. Silence is the same. Bend with it, and it will bend with you." The boy thought about that long after the lantern dimmed. In his dreams, he found himself walking across a field where petals fell endlessly from unseen trees above. They did not touch the ground, but hovered, suspended in air, like snowflakes caught in stillness. He reached out to touch one, and it dissolved into a ripple of silence, soft against his skin. He walked through that field for what felt like hours, every petal turning to hush, until he could not tell if he was dreaming of silence or if silence was dreaming of him. When morning came, he woke with a calm weight in his chest. It wasn't heavy in a painful way, but in a grounding way, like a stone resting at the bottom of a clear pool. He felt steady, more than he had in many days. He looked around at the girl who was still asleep with her notebook resting across. Her lap, and at the mentor, who was awake but still, eyes open to the dawn. The boy realized that even in rest, even in wakefulness, silence lived with them, weaving between breaths, carrying them in ways unseen. They moved slowly through that day. The girl spoke little, her sketches filling page after page. The mentor hummed now and then, not a song, but a low, wordless sound that filled the air with warmth. The boy stretched often, each time hearing something softer, more layered, as if silence itself was opening new rooms for him to enter. He didn't need to understand them all. It was enough to step inside, enough to know they existed. That evening, the three of them sat again by the lantern. This time, none of them spoke. The flame flickered, shadows leaned across their faces, and above them the sky deepened into indigo. The boy felt a stillness descend, not forced but natural, like the way the tide recedes without effort. He closed his eyes and let it hold him. He thought then of all the small things, petals falling, spirals unfolding, flames bending, dreams of suspended snow. He thought of how each carried its own quiet truth, gentle and patient, never demanding to be seen, and he felt grateful, not in a loud or overwhelming way, but in a way that settled deep inside, like a whisper that promised he was safe, he was carried, he was enough. And when at last the lantern dimmed to nothing, they remained in the dark, together, surrounded by the silence that had never left them. The day unfolded with a gentleness that seemed to move slower than time itself. The boy woke early, though the sky still carried the quiet blue of night's fading breath. He lingered in that in-between place where dreams had not quite loosened their grip, and the waking world had not yet settled into its shape. It was a tender moment, fragile and suspended, as though the universe itself had paused to give him space to breathe. He turned onto his side and listened. There was silence, but it was not empty. It was filled with tiny presences, the faint stir of wind, the softened pulse of his own heart, the subtle echo of memory that drifted in and out like smoke. He rose and stretched, slowly, almost ceremonially. His arms reached wide, his body elongated, and he felt the silence bend with him like a curtain shifting around a window. In that instant he sensed again that strange companionship, the silence meeting him, returning something unseen. He didn't try to name it this time. He only received it, as one might accept a gift without asking why it was given. When he lowered his arms, the silence lingered, wrapping itself around him like a shawl. The girl was already awake. She sat cross-legged, her notebook balanced on her lap, sketching without looking at the page. Her eyes stayed on the sky, which was turning pale with the earliest suggestion of sunlight. The boy watched her hand moving almost on its own, spirals flowing into more spirals, lines folding into curves. She seemed to be following something that was guiding her, rather than inventing it herself. When he came closer, she didn't look up, only murmured softly, "It's like the silence is drawing through me." He nodded, though he wasn't sure. She needed an answer. The mentor appeared soon after, carrying a cup of water that reflected the soft light. He set it down near them and sat without speaking. His presence always carried the weight of calm, as though he had walked farther into silence than either of them yet could. After a while, he said, "Sometimes we try to hold silence as though it is fragile. But it does not need our protection. It protects us." His words fell into the air like stones sinking gently into a river, disappearing beneath the surface but leaving ripples that spread outward. The three of them rose and walked toward the grove together, Blossoms continued to fall, though fewer now. The boy noticed the branches had begun to show fruit, small, green, and barely formed. He remembered what the mentor had said about endings making space for beginnings. The falling petals had not been a loss but a passage, a way for something new to arrive. He reached up and touched one of the tiny fruits, feeling the firmness beneath its skin. The girl smiled, still carrying her notebook, and the mentor simply bowed his head. They lingered there a long while, each of them quiet. The grove seemed to hum with its own soft presence, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of how alive everything is. The boy felt it in the air, in the slow unfolding of the leaves, in the way his own breath matched the rhythm of the trees. He stretched again, this time not seeking but offering. He extended himself as if to say, "I am here too." And the silence received him, not with sound, not with words, but with a gentle warmth that settled inside his chest. When night returned, they lit the lantern once more. The flame wavered against the gathering dark, bending with the faintest movements of air. They sat around it as they always did, though tonight there was an added softness, as though they were wrapped in something they couldn't quite name. The mentor spoke after a long silence. The world does not ask us to conquer it, it asks us to listen. Listening is a form of love. The boy felt the truth of that more than he understood it. Listening did feel like love, quiet, patient, without demand. The girl closed her notebook then, resting it beside her. "Sometimes I think the spirals are listening too," she whispered. "They open because they hear us." Her words seemed almost childlike, but the boy knew they carried something deeper. He thought of the spirals she had drawn, always widening, always opening outward. Perhaps that was what listening truly was, the willingness to open wider and wider without end. Later, when sleep came, the boy dreamt again of the field of suspended petals. This time he walked farther, beyond where he had reached before. The petals still hovered, dissolving into silence when he touched them. But ahead he saw something new. A tree, vast and glowing faintly, its branches heavy with spirals instead of leaves. He approached slowly, feeling awe rise within him. The spirals turned gently, each one alive, each one unfolding endlessly. He reached out and placed his hand on the trunk. It was warm, pulsing with something that felt like breath. A voice, not sound but feeling, moved through him. It said nothing he could repeat, yet he understood it in the marrow of his bones. It was a voice of belonging, of acceptance, of endlessness. He felt himself dissolving into it, becoming not smaller but wider, as though his edges no longer ended at his body. He was part of the tree, part of the spirals, part of the silence that breathed through everything. When he woke, he carried that warmth with him, a steady flame in his chest. The morning felt different after that dream. The light seemed gentler, the air clearer. The girl noticed it too. She kept looking at him as if she could see the glow he carried. The mentor said nothing, but met his gaze with quiet recognition, as though he had walked the same dream long ago. They moved through the day in near silence, each breath deep, each step steady. The boy felt no need to ask questions. He simply allowed the dream to live within him, letting it guide him without demand. As evening approached once more, they sat together without the lantern. Instead, they watched the stars emerge one by one. The boy stretched softly toward the sky, and for the first time he felt the silence reach not just back toward him, but upward, outward, into the vastness. It was endless, and yet it was close. He lowered his arms slowly, his heart steady, his breath deep. The girl leaned her head on his shoulder, her notebook forgotten at her side. The mentor closed his eyes, resting his hands together. The boy simply sat still, watching the stars. There was nothing more he needed to do. Silence was with them, around them, within them, and that was enough. The boy awoke to a sky heavy with mist, the kind of morning where the horizon blurred and the world seemed to forget its edges. The grove appeared softer, almost dreamlike, its shapes dissolving into the haze. He felt no urgency to rise quickly. Instead, he lay still, breathing slowly, letting the fog drift into him like a second skin. There was something comforting in not seeing the distance, in allowing the near things, the curve of a branch, the faint stir of leaves, the steady rhythm of his breath, to hold his full attention. When he finally sat up, the girl was walking, slowly through the mist, her arms trailing along the air as though she were touching invisible strings. She moved with unhurried grace, pausing now and then to listen. "The silence is thicker today," she said when she noticed him watching. "It feels like walking through a dream that hasn't decided its shape." He smiled faintly and stood, stretching as he always did. His body lengthened, and he felt the mist stretch with him, parting in soft ripples. The mentor appeared, not from any path, but simply as though he had been within the mist all along. He carried no lantern, no staff, only his quiet presence. "There are days," he said gently, "when silence does not reveal itself by absence, but by fullness. It arrives heavy, not empty, and those who walk in it must learn to listen differently." His words were slow, deliberate, and the mist seemed to cling to them, holding them in the air longer than usual. They spent the morning walking without direction, letting their steps decide the path. The ground was damp beneath their feet, softened by dew. Every so often the boy would pause, reaching out with his long arms, and feel the mist shift as though acknowledging him. The girl scribbled in her notebook, though the pages soon grew damp, the ink smudging into shapes that resembled clouds more than words. She didn't mind. "Not everything needs to be read," she said softly. "Some things only need to be remembered." At midday they came upon a clearing where the mist parted slightly, revealing a pool of still water. Its surface mirrored the haze above so perfectly that it seemed less like a reflection and more like a second sky. The boy knelt beside it, dipping his fingers into the coolness. Circles spread outward, breaking the illusion. He watched them ripple until they vanished, and he thought of how silence moved the same way, disturbed, then settled, always returning to itself. The mentor sat nearby, his gaze fixed on the water, his hands folded in his lap. "Long ago," the mentor began, his voice carrying softly across the clearing, "I too walked through mist that would not lift. I thought it was a kind of hiding, as if the world did not wish to be seen. But I learned something here. The mist is not hiding us from the world. It is showing us how close the world can be when we stop searching for what is far." He leaned forward slightly, his reflection trembling in the water. To live inside mist is to be reminded that intimacy is everywhere, even in silence. The boy listened, his heart steady. He felt the truth of those words resting inside him like a weight that was not heavy but grounding. The girl closed her damp notebook, hugging it gently against her chest, as if the water-stained pages now held something more precious than neat lines. They remained there for some time, saying little, each breath mingling with the soft fog, As the day turned toward evening, the mist began to thin. The boy could see the shapes of the grove returning, the outlines of branches and fruit clearer now. The girl sighed softly, almost as if she missed the closeness the mist had offered. "It's like a friend who left without saying goodbye," she murmured. The boy touched her arm lightly and said nothing. He knew silence was sometimes the only true answer. That night they did not light the lantern. Instead, they sat beneath the slow return of stars, still carrying the softness of the mist within them. The mentor spoke at last, his words like a lullaby. "When silence thickens, let it hold you. When it thins, let it free you. Both are gifts, both are teachings. The key is not to cling, not to resist, but to rest." The boy closed his eyes, listening. He thought again of the dream tree with spirals instead of leaves, the warmth of its trunk, the endless unfolding. He wondered if the mist was another form of that tree, a different branch of silence reaching into their world. He felt no need to answer his own wondering. He simply allowed it to remain, soft and unfinished, like a note that lingers after the song has ended. When sleep came, it was gentle and slow. The boy drifted back into the suspended field of petals, but this time the mist moved through the field too, blurring the edges, softening the glow. He walked carefully, each step cushioned by silence. Ahead, the tree of spirals still waited, but now its branches reached farther into the fog, dissolving, where sight could not follow. He touched the trunk again and felt its warmth, steady and alive. The spirals pulsed faintly, as if breathing. And then he noticed something new. The spirals no longer turned alone. They moved in pairs, sometimes in threes, opening outward together, never perfectly in rhythm, yet always harmonizing. It felt like a conversation without words, each spiral listening, each spiral answering, each one giving space to the other. He thought of the girl, of the mentor, of himself. He thought of how silence did not belong to one alone, but was shared, widened, deepened through companionship. When he woke, dawn was just arriving. The air was clear now, the mist dissolved into sunlight. But he carried the dream with him, the sense of spirals unfolding together. He stretched longer than before, his body reaching upward until it almost trembled. And as he stretched, he felt something different. He was not stretching only for himself. He was stretching for them too, for the girl who drew spirals, for the mentor who spoke in quiet truths, for the silence that had always been listening. He lowered his arms slowly, steadying his breath. The girl was awake beside him, her notebook still damp but open. She smiled faintly as though she had seen the same spirals in her own dream. The mentor looked at them both and nodded once, his eyes carrying a peace deeper than words. And together they began the day, not rushing, not searching, simply walking forward, carried by silence that had no end. The morning unfolded gently, as if the world itself wished to speak only in whispers. The boy felt it first, in the way the branches above him swayed without sound, their movements hushed, careful not to disturb the stillness. The grove was quiet, but not empty, alive with a patience that asked nothing from him. He breathed slowly, drawing in the faint sweetness of dew. It seemed to settle in his chest, a reminder that even the smallest air held kindness. The girl was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the grass with her notebook balanced across her knees. She wasn't writing, not yet, but tracing soft circles over the damp page with her fingertip. He watched her for a while before speaking. "What are you drawing?" She didn't look up, her voice quiet as a breeze. "Not a drawing, just a circle I never finish. Maybe some shapes are meant to stay open." Her words lingered, and he thought about the tree in his dream, the spirals always turning outward, never closing. He stretched without thinking, his body extending into the morning light, and he wondered if he too was something unfinished, something still unfolding. The thought was not heavy, it was tender, like carrying a small lamp inside. When the mentor joined them, his presence was gentle. As always, neither hurried nor late, as though he moved in harmony with an unseen rhythm. "There will be times," he said softly, "when silence arrives not as mist, but as light. Do not be surprised when it blinds you. Do not resist when it softens you. Both are the same gift." He crouched beside the girl, touching her notebook lightly, not with authority but with reverence. "Even an unfinished circle has meaning," he whispered. "Sometimes more than a finished one." The three of them walked toward the edge of the grove, where the land opened into a wide plain. The grasses there bent gently with the wind, each blade bowing without protest. The sky above was pale, the kind of blue that holds 1,000 hidden greys. The boy felt himself grow quieter as he stepped into that openness. Without the grove's embrace, there was nothing to contain the silence. It stretched as far as he could see, endless, unbroken. The girl stopped walking after a while, looking out at the horizon. "It feels like the world could swallow us here," she said softly. "But it doesn't. It just waits." The boy nodded, not sure how to answer. He stretched his arms wide as if to touch the horizon itself, but it remained far, untouchable. He lowered them slowly, not disappointed, simply reminded of how small he was. They walked for much of the day, stopping now and then to rest. Sometimes they spoke in small fragments, but often they said nothing, content with the quiet. At one point, they passed a line of stones half buried in the ground. The girl brushed her hand along them, noting how smooth they felt. "Do you think someone placed these here?" she asked. The mentor's eyes lingered on the stones, his gaze soft. "Perhaps, or perhaps they placed themselves. The earth has ways of arranging what we cannot see." By late afternoon, the plain began to rise into gentle hills. At the top of one, they paused, looking back at the grove now distant behind them. It seemed smaller, softer, yet still alive in its own way. The boy felt a pang in his chest, a quiet tug of longing. The girl touched his arm gently. "We carry it with us," she said, reading his silence without asking. He met her eyes and saw that she understood more than words could tell. That evening, when the sky began to fade, they built a small fire from the dry grasses they had gathered. The flames were low, flickering softly, offering more glow than heat. They sat around it, close enough to see each other's faces, but far enough that the silence still breathed between them. The mentor spoke then, his voice deep and steady. "This journey is not about distance. It is about listening to what distance reveals. Sometimes we must walk far to learn how near everything has always been." The boy listened, letting the words sink into him like water into soil. He thought of the grove, of the mist, of the spirals in his dream. He thought of how each step seemed to uncover another layer of quiet he hadn't known before. It was not a silence of emptiness, but of presence, a fullness too vast to be spoken aloud. When sleep finally came, it was gentle, like lying beneath a sky that had no edge. The boy dreamed again, though this time it was not of the spiral tree. He found himself standing in a vast plain of light, not bright, but soft, like thousands of candles glowing at once. He walked slowly, each step making no sound. The air was warm, and yet he felt no weight on his body. The silence here was not heavy, not veiled, but luminous. Ahead of him, he saw shapes, figures perhaps, though blurred, shifting as though made of the same light. He felt no fear. Instead, he felt recognized, as though they had been waiting for him all along. One figure reached out, and without thinking, he stretched toward it. Their hands never met, but the space between them shimmered. Alive with quiet understanding, he did not need to know who they were. It was enough that they existed, enough that they listened. When he woke, dawn was rising again, spilling pale gold over the hills. The fire was nothing but soft ash, the girl still asleep. Her notebook tucked beneath her head as a pillow. The mentor sat nearby, eyes closed, as though listening to something the boy could not hear. The boy stretched long into the morning air, his body trembling faintly with the effort, and as he did, he felt it again, that unfinishedness, that sense of being part of something still opening. He looked at the horizon once more. It no longer felt unreachable. It simply felt like another silence waiting to be walked into. The day unfolded with a kind of tender slowness, as if time itself had taken a softer breath. The boy walked beside the girl, their steps small, unhurried, each crunch of the dry grass beneath them fading quickly into the wide silence that surrounded everything. The air was cooler here, touched with a faint wind that carried scents he could not name. Scents of earth turned over in secret, of streams hidden somewhere beyond the hills, of flowers not yet awake. He thought of them as invisible companions, unseen but present, keeping pace with him in ways he could only feel. The girl held her notebook loosely now, not writing, not sketching, only holding it as if it were part of her. She glanced at him, once in a while, her smile faint and unspoken. They did not need words in that moment. It was enough that their shadows leaned close together as the sun shifted overhead. The boy found comfort in the way her silence matched his, not heavy, not waiting but steady, like two rivers running side by side. The mentor walked a little ahead, his figure outlined by the slow glow of afternoon. He seemed older today, not in body, but in presence, as though the weight of memory had settled gently upon him. When he finally spoke, it was without turning back. There will come a time when each of you must walk without the other. Do not be afraid of that. Bonds are not broken by distance, only made wider like skies. His words floated back to them, carried on the wind, and the boy felt them echo softly inside his chest. For a while, the girl said nothing. Then she whispered, "Sometimes I think of home, though I am not sure what home means anymore. Maybe it isn't a place. Maybe it's just the people who walk with us, even if only for a while." She looked at him then, and he understood. Home was not behind them, nor ahead of them. It was this moment, here, now, where their steps aligned, and their breaths moved in quiet rhythm. By evening they reached a valley where the grasses bent in all directions, as if bowing to something unseen. A single tree stood there, its branches wide but sparse, as though it had chosen openness over density. The boy felt drawn to it immediately. He sat beneath its shade, stretching his limbs carefully until they seemed to melt into the roots. The girl sat beside him, and together they watched the slow descent of the sun. As the sky deepened, the first stars began to appear. The boy stretched one hand toward them, his fingers trembling faintly. For a moment he thought he could almost touch the light, as though the stars leaned down toward him in quiet recognition. He felt small, yes, but not lost. He felt like part of a larger breathing, as though his own heart beat in time with something vast. Later, when darkness settled fully, they lit another small fire. Its glow was softer here, as if respecting the stars above. The mentor's voice rose gently over the crackle. Every silence carries a teaching. Some are meant to be kept, some are meant to be shared. The hardest lesson is learning which is which. His gaze moved between them, patient, kind. You may not understand yet. That is all right. Understanding often comes long after the lesson itself. The boy thought about the spiral tree in his dream, about the unfinished circles the girl traced, about the way the horizon seemed always to move farther as he approached. Perhaps those too were lessons, not yet clear, but already planted within him like seeds. He closed his eyes, letting the firelight flicker across his skin, and felt sleep drift close. That night he dreamed of water. A wide river stretched before him, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the stars above with startling clarity. He bent down, cupping his hands to drink, but the water slipped through his fingers, vanishing before it reached his lips. He tried again, and again it disappeared. He did not feel thirst. Instead, he felt a quiet wonder, as though the river was teaching him that not everything must be held, not everything must be grasped. Some things were meant only to be seen, to be felt, and then released. When he woke, dawn had touched the valley with a silver glow. Mist curled low around the grasses, moving with a softness that reminded him of breath. The girl was still asleep beside him, her notebook resting open on her chest, faint sketches drawn across its pages in her half-dreaming state. He leaned closer and saw what she had drawn. A series of spirals, each one incomplete, their ends opening outward into blank space. He smiled faintly, touched by the way her dreams seemed to echo his own. The mentor stood at the edge of the valley, watching the horizon. His posture was straight, his stillness steady, as if listening to something beyond hearing. The boy stretched slowly, his limbs reaching outward until he felt a slight tremor run through him. The air was cool, fresh, filled with the promise of another journey. They walked on as the sun climbed higher, their shadows lengthening behind them. The boy noticed how the path before them seemed to bend without reason, as though guided by something unseen. Yet he did not question it. Each turn felt intentional, even if he did not understand it. The girl hummed quietly at his side, a tune without words, soft as a lullaby. It drifted through the morning air, mingling with the silence rather than breaking it. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide stretch of land. From here, the world seemed endless, unfolding in slow, gentle waves. The boy felt his chest swell with awe, his breath catching softly. The girl touched his arm, grounding him. "It is too big to carry," she whispered, "but not too big to love." Her words rested inside him like a stone placed in a riverbed, steady, unmoving, yet part of the current. As the day faded once more, he realized that each step, each silence, each small fire built beneath the stars was part of a larger unfolding he could not yet name. And though he did not know where the path would end, he knew this. He was learning to listen, not with his ears, but with his whole being. And in that listening, he found something like peace. The morning arrived with a hush, as though the world itself had chosen to whisper. Pale light seeped slowly through the mist, painting the hills in shades of silver and faint gold. The boy stirred from his sleep, his body still heavy, his mind wandering somewhere between dream and waking. For a moment, he did not remember where he was, only that a faint hum echoed within him, as though the earth had been singing softly while he slept. When he opened his eyes, the hum faded, leaving him with a quiet ache of longing. The girl was already awake, seated a little distance away, her knees pulled close to her chest. She watched the mist with an expression that seemed half lost, half found. Her notebook rested in her lap, but she did not write. She simply gazed ahead, her eyes following the slow drift of the fog, as if searching for shapes hidden inside it. When the boy joined her, she gave him a faint smile, one that carried warmth but also a kind of questioning. He understood without words. Sometimes the world was too large for answers. The mentor prepared a small fire, though its flames seemed delicate against the wide expanse of morning. He placed a pot above it, letting the steam rise in thin threads. "There is a rhythm to each day," he said softly. "It may not be the rhythm we expect, but if we listen closely, it will guide us where we need to go." His words, like many before, drifted into the air without urgency, settling gently inside them, waiting for the time when they might take root. As they set out, the boy noticed how the path beneath their feet was no longer clear. The earth stretched wide, the grasses bending but not pointing. It was as though the land wanted them to decide for themselves which way to go. He hesitated, but the girl began walking toward the east, where the light shimmered faintly brighter. He followed her, and the mentor followed both, his presence steady, like a shadow that never strayed too far. The day unfolded with an almost dreamlike pace. They passed a field where stones jutted from the ground like teeth, weathered by time, yet standing firm. Birds circled overhead, their wings slicing the air with slow precision. Each detail seemed magnified, as though the world had drawn itself closer, offering its textures and sounds as quiet lessons. The boy stretched his arms, once, letting them extend a little farther than usual, feeling the air shift around him. It was not about reaching, but about sensing, about noticing the unseen spaces between things. By afternoon, they reached a stream that wound lazily across the valley. Its water was shallow but clear, catching fragments of sunlight in rippling patterns. The girl knelt at the edge, trailing her fingers through the flow. "It feels like it wants to tell us something," she murmured, her voice soft. The boy joined her, watching as the current swirled gently around their hands. He thought of his dream from before, the river that could not be held, and felt the echo of it in this small stream. He wondered if perhaps the world repeated its day lessons in many forms until the heart was ready to understand. They lingered there for a while, listening to the steady murmur of water. The mentor finally spoke. "Streams do not argue with stones, they simply find their way around them. Perhaps we are meant to do the same." His eyes rested on the boy for a moment, kind and knowing, before turning back to the horizon. As evening drew near, they climbed a low ridge where the land opened wide beneath them. From this height, the boy could see paths stretching in many directions, though none were truly clear. The sky burned faintly orange, fading into blue, and the first star blinked awake. The girl leaned against him, her shoulder brushing his, and whispered, "Do you ever wonder if the stars remember us?" Her words settled into him like a question without end, one that felt less like something to be answered and more like something to be carried. They built their fire on the ridge, its glow small but steadfast against the darkening sky. The boy stretched his limbs out slowly, feeling the warmth soak into him. He listened to the crackle, the whisper of the wind, the steady breathing of his companions. It struck him how fragile and yet how enduring such moments were. He wished he could fold them into himself, keep them safe for the days when silence might feel heavier. That night, his dream was different. He stood in a vast hall, its ceiling high and curved like the inside of a shell. The walls shimmered faintly, reflecting shapes that moved though he could not name them. In the center of the hall was a single light, pulsing softly, almost like a heartbeat. He stepped closer, but the light grew distant with each step, retreating gently as though inviting him to follow without ever allowing him to arrive. He woke, with the image lingering, unsure whether it was meant to comfort or confuse. Dawn arrived once again, quiet and slow. The valley below was veiled in shadow, while the ridge held the first touch of pale light. The girl stirred beside him, murmuring fragments of dreams she had half forgotten. Her notebook lay open again, filled with shapes that spiraled and broke, never closing. He traced one with his finger, marveling at how even in sleep her hand seemed to echo the mysteries of the world around them. The mentor rose before them, his silhouette sharp against the softening sky. "There will be choices," he said, though no one had asked. "Not all paths are meant to be taken. Some exist only to remind us of the ones we do choose." He let the words settle like stones in water, their ripples spreading slowly through the quiet. As they set out once more, the boy felt a shift inside him, subtle but certain. It was as though each step was teaching him not just about the land, but about himself, his patience, his fears, his quiet longing to belong not to a place, but to a rhythm larger than him. He glanced at the girl, her steady presence beside him, and at the mentor walking just ahead, and felt a calm certainty. Whatever lay ahead, they were already within the story they were meant to live, and beneath that certainty, a softer truth lingered. Sometimes the journey was not about arriving anywhere at all, but about learning how to walk gently, how to listen deeply, how to carry silence as though it were a friend. The morning unfolded in shades of muted gold, as though the sun itself had grown gentle, not wishing to disturb the hush that lingered over the ridge. The boy woke to the faint rustling of the girl's notebook, the sound of paper shifting against paper. She sat cross-legged beside the fire's ashes, her pencil moving slowly, her head tilted in thought. She did not look up when he stirred, yet he felt her awareness reach for him, a quiet acknowledgement that he was near. He sat beside her, not speaking, watching as her hand moved in small arcs, drawing lines that bent like water. It was comforting, this silence they shared, as though words would only clutter what was already understood. The mentor returned from the valley with a small bundle of herbs and roots. His steps were steady, each one deliberate, as though he walked, not just across earth but across memory. He set his bundle down and said only, "The land provides," before beginning to grind the roots with the flat of a stone. The boy watched the movements of his hands, the patience, the certainty, and wondered if he too might someday carry that same rhythm inside him. They began their walk again, the mist lifting in slow veils. The path led downward this time, winding, through clusters of tall grass that swayed with the faintest breeze. The boy stretched his arms outward as he walked, brushing the tips of the grass. Each blade seemed to lean into him, as though recognizing something familiar. He wondered if perhaps the world noticed more than people believed. The girl spoke softly as they moved. "Sometimes I think the land dreams through us, that maybe every step we take is just the earth remembering itself." The boy let her words rest in him. He did not answer, for he felt there was no answer, only the gentle ache of truth that did not require proof. By midday, they reached a grove of old trees, their trunks thick, their branches tangled high above. The air inside was cooler, filled with the scent of moss and shadow. The girl pressed her palm against one trunk and closed her eyes, as though listening. The boy did the same, though at first he felt nothing but bark beneath his skin. Then, slowly, a warmth pulsed faintly, subtle as a heartbeat. It was not a sound, not a voice, but a kind of presence. He opened his eyes, startled, yet comforted, and saw the mentor watching him with a small, knowing smile. They rested beneath the trees, sharing what little food they carried. The girl sketched the patterns of bark, the boy watched the play of light between leaves, and the mentor hummed a tune too soft to place. It reminded the boy of lullabies he had never heard yet somehow remembered. When he asked what song it was, the mentor shook his head. "Not a song," he said, "just the sound of walking a long time." Later, as they left the grove, the boy felt a heaviness in his chest, not sadness exactly, but a pull, as though part of him wished to stay with the trees. He looked back once, and for a moment he thought he saw shapes moving between the trunks, quiet figures that faded as soon as he blinked. He said nothing, but the memory stayed with him, trailing beside his steps. The afternoon stretched slow, the sky softening into pale shades of blue and lavender. They reached a shallow pond ringed with stones, its surface smooth as glass. The girl crouched at its edge and touched the water. Ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection of the sky. "It looks like the sky is breathing," she said. The boy knelt beside her, dipping his own hand, watching the way the ripples collided and blended, never fighting, only folding into each other. He thought again of the mentor's words about streams and stones, about yielding without losing. They lingered there, the silence between them filled only by the faint rustle of grass and the occasional bird darting across the sky. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, and in the darkness behind his lids he saw again the hall from his dream, the light pulsing, distant yet near. But this time he did not try to reach it. He simply let it pulse, steady and calm, until the image faded on its own. Evening arrived with quiet grace. They climbed another rise, the horizon glowing faintly. The girl walked close beside him, her shoulder brushing his from time to time, grounding him in a way he could not put into words. The mentor walked ahead, his figure silhouetted by the lowering sun, and the boy thought he looked less like a man and more like a thread tying them all together. When night came, they built their fire once again. The flames flickered softly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the crackling wood. The girl read aloud from her notebook, not words, but fragments, almost like half-formed lullabies. She spoke them without explanation, her voice weaving images of rivers that circled back to their beginnings, of stars that whispered names only once, of doors that opened to fields no one had ever walked. The boy listened, feeling each fragment settle into him like a seed. He knew some would fade, but others might take root in ways he could not yet see. When she finished, silence returned. The mentor gazed into the fire, his eyes reflecting its glow. Stories are not answers, he said quietly. They are places to rest. The boy held on to that thought, letting it move through him, comforting in its simplicity. Later, as they drifted toward sleep, the boy stretched one arm outward, letting it expand farther than before. It reached across the fire's glow, the fingers bending gently in the air. He felt no strain, no fear, only the soft wonder of being able to reach farther than most. The girl watched, her eyes heavy with sleep, and murmured, "You look like you're touching the night." He smiled, though she was already closing her eyes, her words drifting away like the last notes of a song. The stars appeared one by one, patient and slow. The boy lay on his back, staring at them until his own breathing fell into rhythm with the quiet of the world. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that every step they took was leading them not to a destination, but deeper into themselves, and for the first time he did not feel the need to know what waited ahead. He let his eyes close, the fire's warmth fading, the stars dissolving into dream. And within that dream, the hall returned once more, the light pulsing steadily. But this time, he did not chase it. He simply sat before it, breathing with it, as though it and he were part of the same quiet rhythm. The dawn was slow to rise, as if the sky itself wished to linger a little longer in darkness. A pale hush spread over the ridge, not quite light, not quite shadow. The boy awoke with a strange calm inside him, a feeling like the world had pressed pause. He turned his head and saw the girl sleeping near the fire's fading embers, her hand loosely curled around her pencil as though she had been writing even in dreams. The mentor sat a little distance away, his eyes open, fixed not on the fire or the sky, but on some far horizon within himself. It struck the boy that the man did not always sleep like other people. He seemed to rest in his own way, as though sleep had been replaced long ago with something quieter, something inward. They rose without words, gathering what little they had. The path that day led them down into a valley where the air smelled faintly of stone after rain, even though no rain had touched the earth in days. The boy's steps were slow, deliberate. He felt the weight of something he could not name pressing on him, not heavy in a painful way, but heavy like memory, like standing inside a forgotten song. The girl noticed his quietness but did not ask. Instead, she walked closer, her sleeve brushing against his now and then, steadying him. She looked at him only once, briefly, and that glance was enough for him to feel less alone. The mentor walked ahead, steady as always, his figure like a thread, guiding them through the weave of the valley. By mid-morning, they reached a stretch where tall stones rose from the ground, scattered like a broken circle. Each stone bore lines and marks worn down by time, yet still visible if one looked closely. The boy felt drawn to them. He approached one, laying his hand against its cool surface. His fingers traced the grooves, and for a fleeting instant, he imagined he could hear the faintest hum, a sound not made by wind or bird, but by the stone itself. He pulled his hand back, startled but not afraid. The mentor's voice carried across the stones. These were left by those who walked long before us. Some say they were markers, others say they were songs carved into the earth. Both may be true. He did not explain further, and the boy did not ask. There was a tenderness in not knowing, in letting the mystery rest where it was. They stayed among the stones for a while. The girl sketched their patterns, her brow furrowed, as though trying to capture not just the shapes, but the silence around them. The boy wandered between them, stretching his arm once, letting it brush against two stones at once, connecting them. It felt like bridging a distance that was meant to remain apart. For a moment, he wondered if that was his quiet purpose, not to change the world, but to reach across the spaces that others left empty. They moved on when the sun was high. The valley deepened, the ground softening underfoot with patches of moss. A small stream cut across their path, its water glinting in fractured light. The mentor crouched to drink, cupping his hands. The boy knelt too, lowering his face close enough to see his reflection ripple and bend. His features looked stretched, almost unfamiliar, yet there was something comforting in it, as though the water was showing him what he already carried within. The girl dipped her hands, lifting the water and letting it fall back in thin streams. She smiled faintly and said, "It always feels like the water is teaching us how to let go." Her words lingered between them, neither heavy nor light, but necessary, like the breath they shared. By late afternoon, they came to a meadow, where wildflowers grew in quiet abundance. The colors were gentle, not loud, as if painted in whispers. They rested there, lying back on the grass. The boy felt the earth beneath him like a steady hand, holding him without condition. The girl closed her eyes, humming something low, a tune without words. The mentor sat nearby, silent, his gaze fixed on the far edge of the meadow where trees waited like guardians. The boy let his own eyes close, and for a moment he drifted between waking and dream. He saw again the hall from his nights, the long stretch of shadow and light, but this time there were figures at its edges, faint as breath. They did not move closer, nor did they speak. They simply existed, waiting as though their patience had no end. He woke with the sound of the girl's humming still in his ears, the dream slipping into the air like smoke. As evening approached, the meadow filled with a soft golden glow. The boy stretched his arms upward, farther than before, reaching toward the sky. His fingers spread, brushing the fading light. It felt as though he touched, not the sun itself, but the memory of it, the warmth that lingered after departure. The girl opened her eyes and watched, her lips parting as though she might speak, but she only smiled. That smile stayed with him, longer than any words could have. They set camp near the edge of the meadow where the trees gathered. The fire was small, its flames delicate, yet it gave enough warmth. The mentor shared a few pieces of dried fruit, passing them wordlessly. The girl read fragments again from her notebook, phrases about shadows carrying secrets, about footsteps leaving echoes long after the walker was gone. The boy listened, letting the fragments sink into him like rain into soil. He did not need to understand them all. Some things were meant to rest quietly, waiting for the right season to bloom. Later, when sleep drew close, the boy found himself lying awake longer than the others. The stars were clear above, scattered like soft lanterns. He stretched his arm once more, not in a gesture of reaching, but in one of resting, of simply existing in the space between. The night accepted him without question. He felt it then, that quiet belonging, not earned, not demanded, simply given. The world seemed to breathe around him. Grass shifted with the breeze, the fire whispered as it faded, the stars shimmered, as if keeping watch. He closed his eyes, his breath falling into rhythm with it all. And once again the hall appeared behind his lids, steady and patient. This time he did not sit before the light. He lay down within it, as though the light itself were a meadow, soft and infinite, and there he let himself rest. The morning drifted in softly, not with brilliance, but with the kind of muted light that feels like a hand resting gently on the shoulder. The boy stirred before the others, his eyes opening to the pale sky that carried a faint blush, as though the earth itself had whispered to the heavens during the night. For a moment he remained still, letting the quiet seep into him. There was no hurry, no demand. Just the steady breath of the world moving alongside his own. He rose slowly, stretching, his arms outward, feeling them lengthen in that strange and natural way of his. The air was cool, and each stretch seemed to drink a little of that freshness. When he looked back, he saw the girl still asleep, her notebook pressed against her chest, as though she were afraid it might drift away without her. The mentor, however, was already awake, standing near the trees, his figure part shadow, part dawn. They began walking soon after, their steps carrying them deeper into the forest that bordered the meadow. The trees stood tall and hushed, their branches interwoven in a way that let only fragments of sunlight slip through. It was not a forest that frightened, it was a forest that listened. Each footstep seemed to echo gently, as if the ground remembered everyone who had passed there before. The girl broke the silence once, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think the trees hear us?" she asked. The mentor glanced at her but did not reply with certainty. Instead, he said, "Perhaps they don't need to hear. Perhaps they simply know." The boy thought about this as they walked, and, for reasons he could not explain, the idea filled him with ease. To be known without the burden of explanation, wasn't that a kind of kindness too? The path led them to a clearing where sunlight spilled openly, bright after the dim forest. In the middle of the clearing stood a fallen tree, its trunk wide and smoothed by years of weather. The boy climbed onto it and sat with his legs dangling, feeling the roughness beneath him. The girl joined, balancing carefully, her laughter rising briefly when she nearly slipped. The mentor stayed at the edge, watching them with the patience he always carried. As they rested, the boy's eyes wandered to the sky above the clearing. Clouds drifted there, soft and slow. He found himself recalling the hall from his dreams, the endless stretch of shadow and light. He wondered if the clouds might be carrying pieces of that hall, scattered across the world in forms he could not yet name. The thought gave him a strange comfort, like realizing that dreams were not separate, but woven into the waking hours. The girl began to hum again, the same tune she often returned to. This time, though, she added a few words, fragments of something she had scribbled down. The words were simple, about rivers and stones, about waiting and flowing. Her voice was unpolished, but it carried warmth. The boy leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the song wash over him. It felt like being cradled by time itself. The mentor finally spoke, his tone softer than usual. "Songs have a way of holding what we cannot say. They travel farther than footsteps." Neither child responded, but both carried the words within them as they continued their journey. By midday, they reached a stream wider than the one before, its surface rippling with quicksilver light. They followed it upstream, and after some time, the sound of water grew stronger, fuller. Soon they came upon a waterfall, not grand or thunderous, but modest and clear, tumbling from a stone ledge into a shallow pool. Mist rose in delicate veils, catching the sunlight. The boy felt an urge to step closer, and without thinking, he removed his shoes and entered the water. It was colder than expected, but it did not drive him back. He waded to where the fall touched the pool, letting the spray touch his face and arms. He stretched upward, and the droplets clung to him as though the water itself wished to rest against his skin. The girl laughed lightly and joined him, splashing the surface with her hands. Her laughter echoed against the stones, bright and fleeting. The mentor did not enter the water, but he watched them with something almost tender in his eyes. The boy noticed it when he turned back. He realized then that the man's silence was not emptiness. It was fullness held quietly, like water in a deep well. They stayed there for a while, the girl collecting smooth stones from the shallows, the boy lying back in the cool water, gazing at the sky. When they finally left, each carried something unspoken, a memory etched into their breath. The forest thinned as they moved on, opening once again into slopes of grass that curved gently upward. The climb was slow, steady. By evening they reached the ridge of another hill, and below them stretched a plain that shimmered faintly in the dusk light. From that height, everything seemed softer, smaller. Villages were faint dots, rivers glinted, like threads of silver, and the horizon felt endless. The boy stood still, taking it in. He thought about all the footsteps across that plain, all the lives moving quietly, each with their own weight of longing and love. He wondered if they too had halls inside them, rooms of light, corridors of memory. The thought made him feel less alone, as though his dream was not his alone, but a language shared silently across many hearts. They made camp on the hilltop, the sky wide and unbroken above them. The girl sketched the horizon in her notebook, her hand steady, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fading sun. The mentor gathered a small fire, coaxing it to life with practiced ease. The boys sat close, watching the flames curl and twist. Fire always reminded him of his stretching arms. It reached outward, endlessly, never quite the same twice. That night, as the stars unveiled themselves, the boy lay on his back, tracing constellations he did not know the names of. The girl lay beside him, pointing at one cluster that looked to her like a bird in flight. He nodded, though what he saw was different. A bridge stretching across the dark. They did not correct each other. Both were true in their own way, and both were beautiful. The mentor spoke once more before silence took the night. The sky holds every story ever told. Some you will recognize, some you will not. But all of them are yours to listen to when you are ready. The boy closed his eyes with those words echoing in him. The hall rose again, steady, patient. Yet this time he did not walk it alone. The girl's laughter drifted through it. The mentor's voice lingered at its edges, and the soft rush of the waterfall threaded through the light. It was no longer only his place. It was theirs, shared, alive. And with that, sleep found him easily, like a long-lost friend returning without announcement. The morning arrived slowly, the kind of morning that felt like it was remembering itself. Light filtered through the trees in faint streams, touching the grass in patterns that shifted and dissolved before the boy could follow them fully. He woke with a soft awareness, not of the day, but of the quiet inside him, as though the earth had pressed a gentle hand to his chest. The girl lay beside him, her notebook folded beneath her head like a pillow. The mentor had already moved beyond the ridge, his figure outlined against the light, steady and unhurried. They began walking without speaking. The forest stretched around them, quiet, except for the occasional creak of leaves or distant bird call. Each step seemed amplified, the sound of their feet on the soft soil resonating with an almost sacred rhythm. The boy stretched his arms lightly, feeling the space around him respond, the air bending just enough to brush against his fingertips. It was not a magic of power, but of presence, a quiet knowing that reaching could be gentle and transformative at once. The girl hummed softly, a melody without words that seemed to mirror the sway of the trees. He noticed how her hum rose and fell, not to command attention, but simply to exist in the space with him. He stretched his hand out, letting it hover near hers without touching. The simple gesture carried a depth of understanding, an acknowledgement that they were moving through this world together, yet separately, each learning how to breathe within it. By late morning, they reached a clearing dotted with small rocks and patches of wildflowers. The sunlight here felt warmer, and the boy noticed how the shadows bent softly around each stone. The mentor crouched to examine one, his fingers tracing grooves invisible to most eyes. "Even the smallest stone has a story," he murmured. "It bears witness to time, to wind, to rain, to footsteps." The boy reached for a rock nearby and held it in his hand. Its weight was grounding, solid, and he thought for a moment about how all things carried memory quietly, patiently, whether anyone recognized it or not. The girl collected a few stones as well, arranging them in small clusters on the grass. She did not speak, only moved her hands with care, creating shapes that felt deliberate yet free. The boy watched, thinking about how their own movements might leave impressions in the world. Soft ones, almost imperceptible, yet lasting. They rested there for a while. The boy lay back, letting the sunlight warm his face. The mentor sat quietly, his eyes tracing the horizon, and the girl leaned against a tree, her notebook open but untouched. They did not need conversation. The air was filled with understanding, a gentle acknowledgement that sometimes silence carries more meaning than words ever could. By mid-afternoon, they descended into a valley where a small river wound through smooth stones. The water was shallow and clear, reflecting the sky like glass. The girl knelt and let her hands touch the current, watching the ripples spread outward. "The water knows its path," she said softly. "It doesn't hurry. It doesn't fight. It just flows." The boy dipped his own hands, feeling the cold bite briefly, then soften, as if the river accepted him as it was. The mentor crouched nearby, speaking in his usual gentle tone. "We could learn much from water. It yields without losing, flows without rushing, and yet shapes everything it touches. Patience and persistence are sometimes the same gift." The boy thought of his stretching arms, of the slow, deliberate reach that seemed to expand his understanding more than anything else. He felt the river echo that same lesson in its quiet way. Evening arrived with a hush. The sun lowered itself, slowly, bathing the valley in shades of orange and soft gold. The boy watched as the shadows stretched long, bending across rocks and water alike. The girl hummed again, her voice carrying lightly, blending with the sound of the river and the wind in the grass. The mentor gathered dry twigs and leaves, building a small fire whose flames flickered without insistence, delicate and steady. They ate what little they had brought, sharing a quiet meal that tasted of the earth itself. Roots, berries, bread, simple sustenance that seemed more than enough. The boy felt a warm contentment settle over him. There was no rush to move, no urgency to reach a destination. For now, it was enough to exist in this moment, to be present in the layers of light, wind, and water. Night fell gradually. The first stars appeared, pale and patient. The boy stretched his arms long, reaching toward the sky without thought of reaching anything in particular. It was a gesture of gratitude, of acknowledgement, a quiet celebration of presence rather than attainment. The girl watched him, her eyes reflecting both the fire and the first glimmering of starlight. She did not speak, and neither did he. Yet there was a connection deeper than words, one that held the understanding of their shared journey. The mentor's voice rose softly, barely above the murmur of the night. Each day we walk, each step we take, leaves something behind, perhaps a trace of warmth, perhaps a memory, perhaps nothing at all. It does not matter. The act itself is its own reward. The boy listened, letting the words sink into him. They were not instructions, but reminders simple and profound. He thought about the stretches, the rivers, the stones, and realized that each was a way of learning to inhabit the world fully, without grasping, without forcing. He closed his eyes later, lying on his back, feeling the night air cool against his skin. The stars above seemed like lanterns placed carefully in the sky, each one illuminating some hidden corner of the earth or mind. The girl lay beside him, humming a quiet fragment that reminded him of something long forgotten, yet deeply familiar. The mentor leaned against a nearby rock, silent and watchful, his presence steady like the pulse of the world itself. In his dreams, the boy found himself in the hall once more. The light pulsed as always, steady and infinite, yet this time it was joined by the faint echo of laughter, the soft rustle of water, the delicate hum of a song he could not name. He did not chase the light. He lay within it, letting it surround him, letting it fold over and under him, feeling part of the same quiet rhythm that had guided his waking steps all day. When he woke, dawn was touching the horizon with gentle hands. The meadow stretched wide, dew glinting on grass like scattered diamonds. The girl stirred beside him, notebook pressed beneath her chin, eyes slowly opening to greet the day. The mentor was already standing, his figure outlined by the rising sun. The boy stretched again, arms long and patient, feeling the world bend softly around him. And as they prepared to continue, he realized something tender and certain. It was not the journey that mattered, nor the path, nor the places they would see. It was the way each day, each step, each stretch allowed them to meet themselves and each other with gentle awareness. That alone was enough. The morning began with a quiet that felt almost like a secret. Light filtered gently through the leaves, casting moving patterns on the ground. The boy awoke to the soft rustle of grass and the distant murmur of a stream he could not yet see. He stretched slowly, feeling his limbs lengthen, the familiar hum of his body rising like a soft echo in the still air. The girl lay beside him, her notebook resting open on the ground, pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. The mentor stood a little distance away, his figure calm, unmoving, almost part of the landscape itself. They set out together without speaking. The forest embraced them, each tree and leaf aware of their passage, but indifferent, offering only gentle acknowledgement. The boy walked with his arms partially extended, the stretch a quiet meditation, a way to feel space around him and within him simultaneously. He noticed how the shadows shifted around his fingers, how the sunlight curved through the canopy in slow, liquid lines. There was a rhythm here, unhurried, yet persistent, and he found himself moving in time with it without realizing. The girl hummed softly, a melody without name or urgency. It wove around the boy, grounding him in a shared calm. He extended his hand slightly, letting the tips of his fingers brush the air near hers without expectation. She responded with a faint squeeze, of her own hand against her notebook, subtle, fleeting, yet enough to confirm their shared awareness. The mentor walked slightly ahead, a steady presence, a guide without instruction, teaching not through words, but through the way he simply existed in the world. By late morning, they arrived at a series of low hills, each one rising gently, covered in grass so soft it seemed to absorb sound. They climbed slowly, stopping often to rest, to look around, to let the horizon stretch and settle in their eyes. The boy felt an odd sense of expansiveness, as if each hill was a room within some larger house of air and light. He wondered whether every ridge held its own stories, waiting for travelers who would listen carefully enough to hear them. The girl paused on one crest, crouching to trace the outline of small stones in the grass. "These stones feel like they've always been waiting," she murmured. "Like someone set them just for this moment." The boy nodded, understanding without fully knowing why. Sometimes presence alone carried more meaning than explanation. They did not take the stones with them. They simply existed there, shared by the air, the grass, and the quiet awareness of those who paused to notice. The mentor's voice broke the silence softly. "Every place has its rhythm. Some rhythms are loud, some are subtle. Learning to hear the subtle ones is often the truest education." He did not elaborate, and none of them asked. They continued walking, letting the hills guide their steps, their paths winding and curving without insistence. Each hill felt like a small rehearsal of patience, a gentle lesson in moving forward without haste or fear. By afternoon, they found a creek wider than the streams they had encountered before. Its water was clear, and the sun touched it in faint sparkles. The boy knelt at the edge, dipping his hands into the cold liquid. He felt the water flow around his fingers, soft yet insistent, teaching without words. The girl joined him, letting her hands skim the surface, sending ripples outward. Together they watched the ripples collide and blend, seeing in them the quiet, patient interaction of forces that moved without striving. The mentor remained on the bank, observing, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "There is no need to force," he said. "Water moves because it must, not because it worries. Observe, and you will understand." The boy thought of the stretches, of reaching and releasing, of learning to extend without grasping. He felt the water echo that same lesson, a soft confirmation that presence, patience, and gentle persistence were all part of the same current. Evening approached with the kind of soft urgency that never demands attention but cannot be ignored. The sky shifted gradually, pale gold merging into lavender. The boy lay down on the bank for a moment, feeling the earth beneath him, feeling the coolness of the water touch his toes, feeling the wind whisper lightly across his hair. The girl leaned beside him, humming a melody that now seemed to belong to the creek itself. He closed his eyes, letting the sound thread through him, slow and steady, carrying him into the kind of peace that arrives unbidden but is deeply necessary. Night settled gently over the valley. They built a small fire near the edge of the creek, its flames modest, yet bright enough to cast moving shadows on the surrounding grass. The mentor shared a small portion of dried fruit, and they ate without words. The boy stretched again, longer this time, letting his arms reach as far as they could without strain. The girl watched, a faint smile touching her lips. The simple act of stretching, of extending, had become a quiet ritual, a meditation without ceremony. The stars appeared one by one, patient and deliberate, each a tiny point of calm in the vast night sky. The boy lay on his back, tracing imaginary paths between them. The girl lay beside him, pointing out clusters that resembled birds in flight or distant mountains. Neither corrected the other. The constellations were private, shared, and fluid, just like their thoughts. The mentor leaned back against a rock nearby, silent, his gaze moving from the stars to the creek, to the fire, to the children, and back again. The boy felt sleep approach in the gentle rhythm of the night, the hiss of the creek, the flicker of the fire, the quiet warmth of the girl beside him, the steady presence of the mentor. His dreams came easily, not of distant lands or strange adventures, but of the hall he had come to know so well. The light pulsed, as always, but now it carried the echo of water, the soft vibration of laughter, the faint hum of song. He did not chase the light. He rested within it, and it rested within him. When he woke, the morning light was pale and soft, touching the hills with a tentative hand. The girl stirred, opening her eyes slowly, her notebook once again resting beneath her chin. The mentor was already walking, silhouette etched against the faint glow. The boy stretched once more, arms long, reaching outward, and felt the same quiet satisfaction he had felt every morning. He realized that the journey was no longer only about steps or destinations. It was about the way he had learned to inhabit, the space between, the quiet patience that allowed him to breathe fully in every moment. And with that, they continued onward, not toward any particular place, but toward the next hill, the next stream, the next quiet lesson the world had to offer. He felt certain, finally, that each stretch, each step, each pause was part of a story much larger than he could yet comprehend, and that simply being present was, in itself, enough. The morning arrived like a soft whisper, brushing over the hills with pale, tentative light. The boy woke slowly, feeling the cool weight of the air on his skin, and for a moment he did not move, choosing instead to listen. There was the distant hum of wind through grass, the faint stir of a bird waking in the trees, the quiet pulse of life that seemed to exist just beyond awareness. The girl lay nearby, her notebook half open beneath her, pencil poised as though she had fallen asleep mid-thought. The mentor was already moving, steady, deliberate, tracing the ridge ahead as though the path itself had been waiting for him. They walked in silence, letting their steps form a rhythm that felt older than words. The boy extended his arms once, then twice, letting them move slowly through the air, brushing against tall grasses and low branches. He noticed the subtle response of the world, the way the grass bent ever so slightly, the way the air seemed to fold gently around him. It was as though stretching did not only extend his body, but also the space around him, weaving him softly into the landscape. The girl hummed softly, a tune without beginning or end. It echoed in the boy's mind, blending with the whispering wind, and he realized he had begun to hum quietly as well. The mentor glanced back briefly, eyes carrying the same quiet understanding he always offered. There was no rush, no need for instruction. They moved in tandem with the world itself, and each step seemed to carry them deeper into both the forest and themselves. By late morning, the path led them to a grove of ancient trees. Their trunks were broad and gnarled, branches interlacing, to form a canopy that filtered sunlight into soft, shifting beams. The boy knelt beside a tree, placing a hand on its bark. It was rough, textured with age, yet steady beneath his palm. For a moment, he imagined the tree breathing, its life moving. In slow, deliberate rhythm, he felt a quiet connection, as if the tree and he shared a secret no words could capture. The girl joined him, kneeling beside a neighboring trunk. Her hand rested lightly on the bark, her eyes closed. She whispered something softly, and though he could not hear it clearly, he felt the intention behind the words, a gentle acknowledgement of presence and patience. The mentor remained slightly apart, observing, his posture serene, as though absorbing the grove's quiet energy into himself. They continued onward, following a winding trail that curved around moss-covered stones and small streams. The boy's footsteps were slow, attentive. He noticed the way shadows shifted beneath his feet, how sunlight dappled the ground in delicate, moving patterns. He felt the pull of curiosity, a gentle wonder about what lay ahead, but he did not rush. The journey had become less about reaching, and more about inhabiting each moment fully, feeling the textures, sounds, and small rhythms of the world as they unfolded naturally. By afternoon, they reached a hill that sloped gently toward a wide, calm river. The water shimmered in pale sunlight, reflecting fragments of sky and clouds in its slow, patient flow. The boy knelt at the edge, dipping his fingers into the current. The coldness bit briefly, then softened, a reminder that even discomfort could carry lessons if met with presence. The girl followed, letting the water ripple across her hands, and together they watched the interaction of flow and stone, the quiet resilience of movement without force. The mentor crouched nearby, his gaze steady on the river. "The river moves because it must," he said softly. "It yields, it persists, it shapes the world without hurry or demand. There is wisdom in that." The boy thought of his stretches, of the slow expansion of arms and awareness, and realized that each movement mirrored the river's quiet patience, to extend, to reach, to breathe without forcing. This, too, was a form of guidance. Evening arrived gently, the sky muted in soft golds and pale blues. The boy lay back on the grass, letting the earth cradle him. The girl hummed again, weaving a melody that blended with the river's whisper, the wind through the trees, and the faint crackle of the mentor's fire. He closed his eyes, letting all the sounds, all the small sensations, become part of him. Each breath was a step deeper into calm, each heartbeat a quiet rhythm shared with the world around him. The stars appeared one by one, patient and deliberate. The boy stretched again, longer than before, letting his arms reach as though they could touch the edges of night. The girl watched him, her eyes reflecting both the fire and the first glimmers of starlight. She did not speak, and he did not need her to. There was a simple understanding that sufficed, a connection, quiet and enduring. The mentor spoke softly, his voice almost blending with the night. "Every place holds a story. Every step leaves a trace, whether seen or unseen. What matters is not the trace, but the presence with which it is made." The boy listened, letting the words flow through him, sinking into the quiet spaces he had carried inside himself all day. He realized that being present, noticing, listening, these were acts of care, both for oneself and for the world. Later, as he lay under the stars, the hall from his dreams returned once more. The light pulsed steadily, infinite and patient. This time, however, it was joined by soft echoes, the river, the hum, the faint stir of wind, the presence of the girl and the mentor. He did not chase it, did not rise to follow it. He rested within it, feeling the steady, quiet rhythm of connection, of awareness, of gentle patience that stretched beyond himself and extended into all that surrounded him. When dawn finally brushed the horizon, the boy opened his eyes to soft gold light spilling over the hills. The girl stirred, yawning quietly, her notebook resting beneath her chin. The mentor had already moved toward the ridge, tracing its curve with his calm, deliberate steps. The boy stretched once more, arms long and patient, feeling the world bend softly around him, the rhythm of his breathing in harmony with the air, the river, the earth. And so they continued, not toward a fixed destination, but toward the quiet lessons and rhythms the world offered in its patient way. The boy realized that every stretch, every step, every small act of observation carried a weight of presence, a rhythm of care that would remain long after the steps themselves were finished. And that was enough. The morning arrived with a quiet that felt deliberate, as though the world itself was reminding them to move slowly. Pale sunlight touched the tips of the grass and the edges of leaves, sending tiny flickers across the path. The boy woke first, the cool air brushing his face, and he felt a soft thrill of awareness, a sense that the day had been waiting patiently for him to notice. The girl lay beside him, half-turned, notebook beneath her hand as if it had been a pillow all night. The mentor stood nearby, silhouette still and calm, observing the horizon without pressing it into words. They began walking without conversation. The forest around them seemed to lean in slightly, not pressing, only acknowledging. The boy stretched, his arms outward, feeling the air shift gently against his fingertips, the trees responding to the quiet rhythm of his movement. The girl hummed softly, a melody without beginning or end, weaving through the rustle of leaves, and the distant murmur of running water. The mentor moved ahead, steady and deliberate, his steps forming a quiet pattern of trust and patience. By mid-morning, they arrived at a glade where sunlight pooled on the ground in soft patches. Small stones dotted the earth, worn smooth by rain and time. The boy knelt to examine one, pressing his fingers into the grooves and feeling the subtle give of the soil beneath. It was a sensation of connection, as if the stone were holding a memory of every touch it had known. The girl crouched beside another stone, tracing its outline lightly with her fingertips, eyes closed as though listening. The mentor remained slightly apart, still and observant, allowing them to discover the quiet wisdom of the earth themselves. The boy noticed a small brook nearby, its water moving with steady patience over rocks and through grass. He knelt at its edge, letting the cool current run over his hands. The sensation was grounding, a reminder that movement could exist without urgency, that persistence need not be forceful. The girl joined him, letting her hands ripple the surface, watching the water fold over itself. She hummed again, a soft vibration that blended with the sound of the brook, creating a layered rhythm of life and stillness. The mentor's voice carried across the glade. Even water shapes its path gently. It yields yet persists. We learn patience in its flow. The boy reflected on his stretches, the slow expansion of his arms, the way reaching could be quiet yet persistent. The water mirrored that rhythm, a soft teacher demonstrating lessons of presence without demand. He allowed himself to feel it fully, noticing the way his breath settled into the same tempo as the brook's murmuring current. By late afternoon, they climbed a gentle slope that overlooked a wider valley. The sunlight had softened into gold, and the horizon stretched endlessly. The boy stood still, arms half extended, taking in the expanse. He thought of every step that had led him here, every small movement that had been deliberate, yet unhurried. The valley below held shapes of life and memory he could not name, but felt nonetheless, as if it carried echoes of everything that had passed and everything yet to come. The girl paused beside him, pointing to a cluster of distant trees. "Do you see how they reach toward the sun?" she asked softly. The boy nodded, understanding not with words, but with feeling. Every element seemed to hold intention without speaking, teaching without command. The mentor remained a little apart, his figure outlined by fading light, observing without pressing their understanding, allowing the rhythm of presence to flow naturally. Evening approached with a tender hush. They descended into a meadow dotted with wildflowers that bent lightly under the wind. The boy lay on the grass, arms stretching once more, feeling the horizon curve around him. The girl hummed again, her melody threading through the meadow, blending with the whisper of leaves and the soft murmur of distant water. The mentor gathered twigs and leaves to build a modest fire, its flames dancing lightly, delicate and steady. They shared a quiet meal, simple sustenance, nothing extravagant. The boy noticed the way even small actions carried meaning, the way sharing, observing, being present could hold weight in a world that often overlooked subtlety. Each gesture was a quiet story, a ripple moving outward, touching the space around, them with gentle insistence. Night fell with a velvet patience. The stars appeared, each one deliberate and soft, their points of light reflecting in the boy's eyes. He stretched again, letting his arms extend toward the sky, feeling the quiet connection of presence across space. The girl lay beside him, pointing out clusters that reminded her of birds, distant mountains, or long-forgotten shapes. The boy did not correct her. Instead, he saw his own interpretations, and the harmony of difference felt comforting. The mentor remained near, silent, his gaze moving from sky to fire to children, his presence steady like the pulse of night itself. The boy's dreams arrived with familiar warmth. The hall from his nights returned, light pulsing steadily, infinite and patient. This time it carried with it echoes of the brook, the hum, the laughter that had passed through the day, and the quiet presence of the girl and mentor. He did not chase the light. Instead, he lay within it, letting the rhythm of connection, of observation, of gentle patience fold over him. The light and presence were indistinguishable, and that indistinction became a comfort he could breathe into fully. When he woke, the first pale light of morning brushed the ridge, scattering gold across the grass. The girl stirred, eyes opening, slowly, notebook still beneath her hand. The mentor had already begun tracing the path ahead, his figure calm and deliberate against the soft glow. The boy stretched once more, arms reaching outward, feeling space bend around him. He understood, finally, that the journey was not defined by destination or steps, but by the way each day allowed him to be fully present, to notice and inhabit the quiet rhythms of life. And so they moved onward, toward no fixed place, carrying with them the subtle lessons of patience, presence, and gentle awareness. Every stretch, every step, every small pause mattered, not as a means to an end, but as an act of care for themselves and the world. The boy understood that even the smallest gestures, stretching, observing, breathing fully, were forms of guidance, shaping the way they inhabited space and time. Each movement was a quiet echo of a story far larger than themselves, one they could only touch gently, patiently, and without demand. The morning unfolded slowly, like a page turning itself in soft light. The boy woke first, feeling the cool hush of the world pressing lightly against his skin. He stretched his arms without thought, letting them reach outward, upward, as if the sky itself would accept the gesture. The girl remained beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling slightly over the edge. The mentor stood a short distance away, his figure steady and calm, tracing the horizon with the same patient awareness he always carried. They began walking together in quiet rhythm. The forest embraced them, neither pressing nor ignoring their presence, simply allowing them to pass through. The boy felt the pull of his own awareness in each step, noticing the subtle bends of branches, the way sunlight brushed across the leaves, the faint resonance of the earth beneath his feet. Stretching became a meditation, a means of inhabiting space without demand, of sensing both the world around him and the quiet spaces within. The girl hummed softly, a tune without beginning or end. It wove around him like a gentle thread, guiding him into a kind of awareness that was both calm and alert. The boy extended his hand slightly toward hers, letting the air between them carry a shared warmth, a quiet acknowledgement of companionship. The mentor walked slightly ahead, a steady presence, allowing their awareness and intuition to guide the steps. No instruction was necessary. The rhythm of being was sufficient. By late morning, they arrived at a hill whose slope was gentle, its grass tall and soft, leaning lightly under the caress of the wind. The boy paused to touch the earth, feeling the subtle textures, noticing the small stones, the faint impressions of past footsteps. It struck him that every surface, every curve, every pattern carried memory, some visible, some hidden, and that awareness of these echoes could guide the heart as much as the eyes. The girl knelt beside a mossy patch, tracing its curves with her fingers, whispering something to herself that he could not hear, yet understood in the way one understands intention without words. The mentor crouched nearby, observing without comment, his gaze sweeping from grass to stone to sky. After a moment, he said softly, "Every place has a memory. Some are loud, some faint. The art is in noticing without altering, in presence without interference." The boy felt the truth of this resonate deeply, a lesson mirrored in the stretches of his own arms, the slow unfolding of each movement that required nothing from the world except participation. By afternoon, the trail led them into a shallow valley, where a stream wound through mossy banks and smooth stones. The water was clear and soft, and the boy knelt to let his hands rest in the current. The chill of the water was sharp at first, then comforting, teaching him that presence could carry both tension and release without harm. The girl joined him, letting her hands ripple the water and watching the interaction between flow and stone. She hummed again, and the sound blended with the river's murmur, creating a rhythm that was both delicate and expansive. The mentor's voice rose softly, carried by the gentle breeze. The river moves because it must. It yields, it persists, it shapes quietly and steadily. We may learn much from its patience. The boy reflected on the stretches of his own body, the slow elongation of limbs, the feeling of expanding into space without rushing, without forcing. The water mirrored this rhythm, and he recognized in it the quiet guidance he had been learning. Presence, attention, patience. Evening approached with a soft hush, the sky fading into pale golds and faint violets. They found a small clearing for camp where fire could be coaxed gently from dry twigs and leaves. The boy lay on the grass for a while, feeling the earth cradle him, letting his arms extend long and slow, tracing shapes in the air. The girl hummed her melody, now mingling with the fire's soft crackle and the gentle rustle of leaves. The Wash mentor built the fire without hurry, its flame delicate yet steady, a reflection of the calm persistence that had guided them all day. They ate quietly, simply, with no need for conversation. The boy noticed the way small gestures carried meaning, the way observing, stretching, and presence themselves were acts of care, not just for oneself, but for those around. Each step, each breath, each quiet observation was an imprint in the subtle world of the meadow, just as ripples spread in water, touching more than the eye could see. Night fell fully, stars appearing one by one with patient clarity. The boy lay back on the grass, stretching arms once more toward the sky, feeling the faint pulse of the night in his fingertips. The girl pointed out clusters of stars that looked like shapes, distant memories, fragments of stories. He did not correct her. Instead, he traced his own constellations, and the harmony of difference felt natural, comforting. The mentor remained nearby, watching quietly, his presence a soft constant like the pulse of the earth itself. As he drifted towards sleep, the hall returned, the hall of light and shadow he had known for so many nights. Yet this time it was not a solitary place. The echoes of the day, the river, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's quiet vigilance, folded gently into the hall. He did not move toward the light. He rested within it, allowing the connection, the awareness, the patience of the day to seep into him fully. The hall, the light, the sounds of life, they were indistinguishable, and this unity became a lullaby of calm that carried him deep into rest. When dawn arrived, soft and slow, the boy awoke to pale gold spilling over the ridge. The girl stirred beside him, notebook still beneath her hand, fingers curling slightly over its edge. The mentor had already begun tracing the path forward, calm and deliberate. The boy stretched once more, long and patient, feeling the gentle acceptance of space around him. He understood now that the journey was not measured by miles or sights, but by presence, awareness, and the quiet lessons carried in every small act, every gentle stretch, every attentive step. And so they moved forward, not toward any fixed destination, but toward the rhythm and patience the world offered in its quiet way. Every stretch, every step, every pause was an acknowledgement of the subtle stories embedded in earth, water, and air. The boy realized that presence itself could carry the weight of care and meaning, and that even the simplest actions, stretching, noticing, listening, could leave a trace of quiet grace, rippling outward beyond the day, the path, and even himself. The morning came in quiet layers, soft and deliberate, brushing the hills with light that felt almost like a whisper. The boy awoke slowly, feeling the cool air press lightly against his skin, each breath a subtle reminder of presence. He stretched his arms, long and patient, letting the space around him bend gently into the rhythm of his movement. The girl lay beside him, notebook resting beneath her, fingers still curling over the edge, as if holding on to a fragment of dreams. The mentor had already moved a few steps ahead, his silhouette calm and unwavering against the pale horizon. They walked together in silence, each step measured, neither hurried nor hesitant. The forest around them responded quietly, leaves swaying in acknowledgement of their presence, the air carrying faint scents of moss and earth. The boy extended his arms again, noticing how the subtle movement seemed to ripple through the world, shifting shadows slightly, brushing grasses and aligning the space around him in gentle waves. It was a stretch, not only of body but of awareness, a way of inhabiting the world with patience and care. The girl hummed softly, a tune without beginning or end, weaving through the rustle of leaves and the murmur of distant streams. The boy felt it thread into him, blending with his own quiet breaths. He lifted his hand slightly, letting it hover near hers, the space between them a small acknowledgement of companionship. The mentor maintained a few paces ahead, a steady presence, guiding without words, allowing their awareness to follow its own intuitive rhythm. By mid-morning, they arrived at a meadow where wildflowers bent lightly under a gentle breeze. The boy knelt to touch a small cluster of petals, feeling the delicate textures, noticing the subtle variations in hue and shape. The girl crouched beside another bloom, tracing its outline with her fingers, whispering softly to herself in a way he could not understand yet felt deeply. The mentor observed, quiet and patient, allowing the children to discover the intricate wisdom of the earth through their own awareness. A brook ran nearby, its water clear and slow. The boy knelt at its edge, dipping his fingers into the cool current. The sensation was grounding, reminding him that movement could exist without urgency and that persistence did not require force. The girl joined him, letting her hands ripple the water, watching the patterns formed as ripples collided and spread. Her humming continued, now merging seamlessly with the brook's gentle murmur, creating a harmony that seemed to thread through the very air around them. The mentor's voice rose softly over the sounds. Water shapes its path by yielding and persisting. Observe it, and you will learn how presence itself can guide. The boy thought of his stretches, the slow elongation of his arms, the quiet expansion into space without grasping or tension. The water mirrored his movement, its patient flow, offering an unspoken lesson in persistence, patience, and gentle guidance. He allowed the lesson to settle into him, a rhythm shared between body, mind, and environment. By afternoon, they climbed a low ridge that overlooked a wide valley. Sunlight softened, casting gold and lavender over the grass and distant trees. The boy stood still, arms half extended, taking in the expanse. He noticed the small details. The curve of distant hills, the shimmer of water threading through the valley, the subtle swaying of grass in gentle wind. Each detail held a story, a quiet memory embedded in the shapes of the world. The girl paused beside him, pointing to a distant grove. "See how the trees lean toward the light?" she said softly. The boy nodded. It was not just the trees. They all leaned toward presence, toward awareness, and that was enough. The mentor spoke after a pause, his voice barely above the whisper of wind. Every step, every place, every pause leaves an imprint, even if unseen. The act of being present shapes the world more than you realize. The boy reflected on the stretches, the quiet observation of earth, water, and sky. It was a subtle lesson, one that did not demand mastery but invited participation. Presence was both the journey and the destination, a gentle weaving of awareness into the texture of life. Evening arrived with a soft, golden hush. They set up a small fire, its flames gentle and deliberate, reflecting the calm rhythm of their day. The boy lay on the grass, arms stretching long once more, feeling the world cradle him as it had all day. The girl hummed her melody, now intertwined with the fire's soft crackle and the gentle rustle of leaves. The mentor sat quietly, tending the flames, his presence steady, offering guidance through the mere act of being there. They shared a simple meal, their attention on the act of eating as much as on the food itself. The boy noticed how small gestures could carry weight, passing a morsel, observing closely, being present in every motion. Even the quiet stretches and extended breaths of the day were acts of care, shaping both themselves and the spaces they inhabited. Each small action left ripples of presence, subtle yet enduring. Night fell fully, stars appearing one by one, patient and deliberate in their illumination. The boy stretched again, arms reaching toward the sky, sensing the pull of space and night. The girl pointed out clusters of stars that reminded her of birds, rivers, or fragments of long-forgotten stories. He did not correct her, tracing his own constellations instead. The harmony of their different perceptions felt natural, comforting, a reflection of the quiet diversity of the world itself. The mentor remained nearby, silent, his gaze shifting from sky to fire to children, steady like the pulse of the earth. The boy's dreams arrived, familiar and warm. The hall returned, light pulsing infinitely, patient and serene. This time, however, the echoes of the day, the brook, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's calm presence, folded into the hall. He did not chase the light or attempt to master it. Instead, he rested within it, letting the steady rhythm of connection, observation, and patience envelop him completely. The light, the presence, and the sounds of life became indistinguishable, forming a quiet lullaby of comfort and calm. When dawn brushed the horizon with soft gold, the boy awoke, feeling the world unfold gently around him. The girl stirred, fingers curling lightly over her notebook. The mentor had already begun tracing the ridge ahead, deliberate and calm. The boy stretched, arms long and patient, sensing the subtle embrace of space around him. He understood that the journey was no longer about distance or destination. It was about presence, awareness, and the quiet lessons of patience and care carried in every small act, every attentive step, and every gentle movement. And so they moved forward, not toward any fixed place, but toward the quiet lessons the world offered. Every stretch, every step, every pause was a way to acknowledge the subtle stories of earth, water, and air. The boy realized that even simple gestures, stretching, observing, listening, could carry the weight of care and leave ripples of quiet grace that extended far beyond themselves. Presence itself was the journey, the imprint, and the gift. The morning unfolded slowly, draping the hills in soft gold light that felt almost deliberate. The boy woke first, his breath mingling with the cool air, his body still and aware. He stretched his arms, long and patient, letting each movement reach not only outward but inward, filling him with a quiet rhythm that seemed older than the day itself. The girl lay beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling slightly, over the edge, holding a fragment of her dreams. The mentor had already begun walking ahead, his figure calm and steady against the horizon, a quiet presence that anchored the world around them. They moved in silence through the forest, each step measured, attentive, neither hurried nor hesitant. The boy felt the subtle shifts of the world around him, the brush of leaves against his fingertips, the gentle sway of grass, the faint murmur of life unseen. Stretching became meditation, a way to inhabit space without insistence, to notice without grasping, to breathe fully into the rhythm of presence. The girl hummed softly, a melody that had no beginning or end, threading through the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves. The boy lifted his hand slightly toward hers, allowing the small gap between them to carry a quiet warmth, an acknowledgement of companionship. The mentor remained slightly ahead, his calm silhouette offering guidance through example rather than instruction, a steady pulse that invited trust without demand. By mid-morning, they reached a grove of tall, ancient trees. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating soft patterns on the ground that shifted as though alive. The boy knelt beside one, pressing his hand into the rough bark, feeling the subtle vibration of life within it. For a moment, he imagined the tree breathing, sensing its own rhythm in a way that mirrored his own. The girl crouched beside another trunk, her fingers tracing the curves of moss, whispering softly. The words were private, but the intention was clear. Presence, attention, gentle acknowledgement of life in its quiet forms. The mentor crouched a few paces away, observing silently. Every tree, every stone, every current of wind carries memory, he said softly. Some are loud, some faint. Our task is not to alter them, but to notice, to inhabit them with care. The boy thought of his stretches, the slow elongation, ituya, of limbs, the feeling of space opening around him. He realized that these small movements, these patient gestures, mirrored the world around him in rhythm and persistence. By afternoon, the path led them to a stream wider and calmer than any they had seen before. The boy knelt at the edge, letting his hands rest in the water. Its cool touch was grounding, offering the quiet lesson that movement and patience could coexist, that flow need not be forced. The girl joined him, letting her fingers ripple the surface, watching the interaction between current and stone. Her humming intertwined with the water's murmur, creating a rhythm that seemed to inhabit the space between them, a gentle song without words. The mentor's voice rose softly, carried by the wind. See how the river shapes its path, yielding yet persistent? Presence is a similar force, quiet, patient, and enduring. The boy reflected on his stretches, the slow expansion of his arms, the careful attention to space and motion. The water mirrored his actions, teaching him without words, offering lessons of patience, balance, and awareness that flowed deeper than any spoken instruction. Evening arrived with a tender hush. They set up a modest fire near the water, flames flickering softly, delicate yet steady. The boy lay back on the grass, stretching long and slow once more, feeling the earth cradle him. The girl hummed her melody again, now blending seamlessly with the fire's gentle crackle and the soft whisper of night. The mentor tended the flames quietly, a presence that required no explanation, guiding through the act of being there. They ate simply, quietly, and each bite became part of the rhythm of the day. The boy noticed the subtle significance of presence. The act of observing, stretching, listening, and being aware was itself a form of care. Every gesture, no matter how small, left a trace in the world, as ripples spread in water, touching more than the eye could see. Awareness became an act of love, a quiet acknowledgement of life and space. Night descended slowly, stars appearing one by one with deliberate patience. The boy stretched again, letting his arms reach toward the sky, feeling the gentle pull of space around him. The girl pointed out clusters of stars that seemed like birds, distant rivers, or memories carried lightly across the night. He traced his own constellations, honoring the difference, and the quiet harmony of their perceptions felt comforting. The mentor remained near, silent, his presence a calm rhythm akin to the pulse of the earth beneath them. The boy drifted into dreams, returning to the hall of light and shadow that had become familiar. Yet this night it carried the echoes of the day, the brook, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's patient presence, folding them into the pulsing hall. Did not move toward the light, but rested within it, letting the rhythm of connection and awareness envelop him fully. The hall, the light, and the soft sounds of life became one, a lullaby of presence and calm that carried him into sleep. When dawn finally brushed the horizon, the boy awoke to pale light spilling over the ridge. The girl stirred beside him, notebook beneath her hand, fingers curling gently over the edge. The mentor had already begun tracing the path forward, steady, and deliberate. The boy stretched once more, arms long and patient, feeling the world respond around him. He understood now that the journey was no longer about distance or destination. It was about presence, attention, and the quiet lessons embedded in every small act, every gentle movement, every stretch, every mindful step. And so they moved onward, toward no fixed destination, carrying with them the subtle lessons of awareness, patience, and quiet care. Each stretch, each step, each pause was an acknowledgement of the stories written in the air, the earth, and the water. The boy realized that even the simplest gestures, stretching, observing, breathing fully, could leave traces of quiet grace, rippling far beyond the immediate space. Presence itself was the journey, the imprint, and the gift, steady and enduring as the earth beneath them. The morning unfolded softly, as if the world itself had decided to breathe slowly. Pale light filtered through the trees, scattering across the path in faint, shifting patterns. The boy woke first, feeling the cool hush of dawn press lightly against his skin. He stretched his arms deliberately, letting them extend outward, upward, reaching as far as the space around him would allow. The girl lay beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling over the edges as though still holding on to fragments of dreams. The mentor had already begun walking ahead, his figure steady and calm, a quiet guide against the horizon's gentle glow. They moved through the forest in silence, each step attentive, neither rushed nor hesitant. The boy noticed the subtle rhythms of the world, the sway of branches, the faint vibration of leaves, the quiet murmur of life hidden just beyond sight. Stretching became more than movement. It was a way to inhabit space fully, to sense both the world around him and the quiet spaces within. Each breath and stretch carried a soft echo of presence, a reminder that being fully alive required patience and gentle attention. The girl hummed softly, a tune without beginning or end, threading seamlessly with the rustle of leaves and distant murmurs of water. The boy lifted his hands slightly toward hers, letting the air between them carry a quiet warmth, a subtle acknowledgement of companionship. The mentor remained a few paces ahead, steady and deliberate, his calm presence guiding without instruction, allowing intuition and awareness to lead their steps naturally. By mid-morning, they arrived at a clearing where sunlight pooled in gentle patches. The grass was tall, bending lightly under a tender breeze. The boy knelt, pressing his fingers against the earth and stones, noticing the faint impressions of past footsteps, the delicate curves of moss, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow. The girl crouched nearby, tracing the outlines of small rocks and flowers with her fingers, whispering softly as if speaking to the life itself. The mentor observed silently, allowing them to explore the quiet lessons embedded in every surface, every texture, every subtle movement of the world. A stream wound its way through the clearing, calm and reflective. The boy knelt at its edge, letting the cool water wash over his hands. The sensation grounded him, teaching patience and gentle persistence without force. The girl joined him, sending small ripples across the surface with her fingertips, her humming blending effortlessly with the murmur of water. Together they created a quiet rhythm that filled the space between, a song without words, delicate yet enduring. The mentor's voice broke the silence, soft as a breeze. Water moves because it must. It yields, it persists, it shapes the world without demanding attention. Learn from it. Presence is the same. It flows quietly, steadily, and endures. The boy considered his stretches, the slow, patient elongation of limbs, the gentle attention to the world around him. The water mirrored his movements, offering a lesson that could not be spoken in any ordinary words. He allowed himself to feel it fully, a rhythm of patience, awareness, and quiet guidance settling deep within him. By late afternoon, they ascended a ridge overlooking a wide valley, softened by the golden light of evening. The boy paused, arms half extended, taking in the expanse. He noticed details he might have missed in haste, the faint shimmer of water threading through the valley, the subtle sway of grass, the distant ripple of trees in wind. Every element carried memory, a quiet history that spoke not in words, but in presence. The girl pointed toward a grove in the distance. "See how the trees lean toward the light?" she asked softly. The boy nodded. Their connection to space, to awareness, was mirrored in the leaning of trees, the patient pull toward presence, and that understanding was enough. The mentor spoke after a pause, voice low and deliberate. Every step, every place, every pause leaves an imprint. The act of noticing shapes the world more than we often imagine. The boy reflected on the day's stretches, the mindful observation, the slow, patient steps. Presence itself was a kind of care, a quiet, shaping force. The journey was no longer measured in distance, but in the attention brought to each moment, each act, each stretch of arms into space. Evening fell with gentle hush, and they built a small fire that flickered delicately against the soft darkness. The boy lay back on the grass, stretching long once more, feeling the earth cradle him. The girl hummed her melody again, intertwining with the fire's crackle and the soft murmur of night air. The mentor tended the flames quietly, a presence that required no words, guiding by simply existing, by embodying patience and steady awareness. They ate quietly, sharing a simple meal, observing not only the sustenance, but the act of being present in each motion. The boy noticed that small gestures, even stretching or observing, carried significance. Every act of awareness was a ripple, extending outward, touching spaces beyond immediate perception. The gentle rhythm of presence became a kind of quiet conversation with the world, teaching him lessons of care, patience, and connection. Night came fully, stars appearing patiently, one by one, in deliberate clarity. The boy stretched again, letting his arms reach toward the sky, feeling space respond softly. The girl pointed to constellations she imagined, fragments of birds or rivers or long-forgotten dreams. He traced his own patterns, honoring the differences, feeling comfort in harmony without correction. The mentor remained nearby, silent, his presence steady and enduring, like the pulse of the earth beneath them, a reminder that constancy could be gentle and quiet. The boy's dreams arrived warm and familiar. The hall of light pulsed steadily, infinite yet patient. This night it carried the day's echoes, the brook, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's calm presence, folding them into the rhythm of the hall. He did not move toward the light, but rested within it, letting connection, awareness, and patient observation envelop him completely. The hall, the light, and the soft sounds of life became indistinguishable, forming a lullaby that carried him deeply into rest. When dawn brushed the horizon with pale gold, the boy awoke, sensing the world unfold softly around him. The girl stirred. Beside him, notebook beneath her hand, fingers curling slightly over the edge. The mentor had already traced the ridge ahead, calm and deliberate. The boy stretched, arms long and patient, feeling the subtle embrace of space around him. He understood that the journey had become less about distance or destination and more about presence, awareness, and the quiet lessons contained in every gentle act, every careful step, every mindful stretch. And so they moved forward, toward no fixed destination, carrying the quiet teachings of patience, presence, and care. Every stretch, every step, every pause acknowledged the subtle stories written in air, water, and earth. The boy realized that even the simplest gestures, stretching, observing, breathing fully, could leave a lasting imprint of grace and quiet, awareness rippling far beyond the day, the path, and even himself. Presence itself had become the journey, the story, and the gift. The morning arrived softly, a gentle shift of light over the hills, quiet enough that the world seemed to hold its breath. The boy woke first, lying still for a long moment, sensing the air press lightly against his skin. He stretched his arms slowly, feeling the space around him respond in subtle waves, and the cool weight of dawn seemed to settle into his bones. The girl lay beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling over its edge as though holding on to fragments of dreams. The mentor had already begun walking ahead, his figure steady, a quiet line against the pale horizon. They moved through the forest without speaking, letting each step settle into a rhythm. The boy noticed the gentle sway of branches, the faint vibration of leaves, the distant murmur of life hidden just out of sight. Stretching became a meditation, a slow inhabiting of space, a way to notice without grasping, to breathe fully into the rhythm of presence. The world, in its quiet patience, seemed to expand around him, encouraging his awareness to unfold naturally, like a leaf opening to sunlight. The girl hummed softly, a melody that had no beginning and no end, threading through the air and the subtle rustle of leaves. The boy extended his hand slightly toward hers, letting the gap between them carry warmth, a silent acknowledgement of companionship and presence. The mentor remained a few paces ahead, a steady, calm presence, guiding by example rather than words, inviting intuition and attention to direct their journey. By mid-morning, they reached a clearing where sunlight pooled in delicate patches across soft grass. The boy knelt, pressing his fingers into the earth, feeling the texture of moss, soil, and stone. Each small detail seemed alive with memory, as though the world itself carried stories in every curve, in every indentation. The girl crouched nearby, tracing the contours of small stones and flowers, whispering softly to them. Her words were private, yet the intention of attention and presence was clear. The mentor watched silently, allowing them to discover the quiet lessons embedded in the world. A rhythm older than thought or speech, a stream meandered lazily through the clearing, its surface reflecting sky and leaves. The boy knelt at its edge, letting the cool water lap gently over his fingers. The sensation grounded him, a reminder that movement and patience could coexist, that persistence could be quiet and unforced. The girl joined him, creating ripples with her fingertips, her humming blending seamlessly with the water's murmur. Together they produced a rhythm that filled the space, a soft song without words, delicate yet resonant. The mentor spoke softly, voice carried by the breeze. See how water shapes its path. It yields, it persists, it flows without demanding. Attention, presence is similar, it moves quietly, steadily, enduringly. The boy reflected on his stretches, the slow elongation of limbs, the careful attention to movement and space. The water mirrored his own rhythm, offering lessons in patience, awareness, and gentle guidance that seeped deeper than words could reach. By late afternoon, they climbed a gentle slope overlooking a wide valley, softened in the gold and violet of evening light. The boy paused, arms half extended, taking in the expanse. He noticed details he might have missed in haste, Shimmer of water in the valley, the sway of grass, the gentle ripple of distant trees. Each detail carried memory, a subtle story of the past, quietly etched into the present. The girl pointed toward a distant grove. "See how the trees lean toward the light?" she said. The boy nodded, understanding that their attention, like the trees, reached naturally toward awareness, and that recognition alone was sufficient. The mentor spoke after a moment, voice low and deliberate. "Every step, every place, every pause leaves a trace. The act of noticing shapes the world more than you realize." The boy reflected on the day's stretches, the quiet observation, the careful presence in every step. Awareness itself became an act of care, a shaping force, gentle yet enduring. The journey was no longer measured in distance or milestones, but in the attention devoted to each moment, each act, each mindful movement. Evening arrived fully, soft and quiet. They built a small fire that flickered delicately in the cool air, gentle yet steady. The boy lay on the grass, stretching long once more, feeling the earth cradle him. The girl hummed, her melody now intertwined with the fire's crackle and the gentle breath of night. The mentor tended the flames without haste, his presence a quiet guide, an embodiment of patience and calm, showing through being rather than speaking. They ate quietly, a simple meal shared without words. The boy noticed that every small gesture, stretching, observing, listening, carried significance. Presence, he realized, was itself an act of care. Each observation, each breath, each mindful step was a ripple extending outward, touching the world beyond immediate perception. Awareness became a conversation, subtle and ongoing, a gentle interaction with the life around him. Night fell fully, stars appearing one by one, patient and deliberate in their illumination. The boy stretched again, arms reaching toward the sky, feeling space respond softly. The girl pointed out constellations she imagined, fragments of birds, rivers or dreams long forgotten. He traced his own patterns, honoring the differences, sensing harmony in divergence. The mentor remained nearby, silent, steady, a pulse like the earth beneath them, a reminder that constancy could be gentle and comforting. The boy drifted into dreams, returning to the hall of light he had visited so often. Yet tonight it carried the echoes of the day, the stream, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's presence, folding them seamlessly into the rhythm of the hall. He did not move toward the light. Instead, he rested within it, letting the rhythm of connection, awareness and patience envelop him fully. The hall, the light, and the soft sounds of life became one, a lullaby carrying him deeply into sleep. When dawn brushed the horizon with pale gold, the boy awoke, sensing the world unfold gently around him. The girl stirred beside him, fingers curling lightly over her notebook. The mentor had already begun tracing the ridge ahead, calm and deliberate. The boy stretched once more, arms long and patient, feeling the embrace of space around him. He understood that the journey had become less about distance or destination and more about presence, awareness, and the subtle lessons carried in every mindful act, every small gesture, every attentive step. And so they moved onward toward no fixed destination, carrying with them the quiet teachings of presence, patience, and care. Each stretch, each step, each pause was a recognition of the subtle stories written in air, water, and earth. The boy realized that even the simplest gestures, stretching, observing, breathing fully, could leave traces of quiet grace, rippling far beyond the day, the path, and even himself. Presence itself had become the journey, the story, and the gift. The morning unfolded with a quiet that felt deliberate, as if the world itself had paused to breathe alongside them. The boy woke first, stretching his arms slowly, letting each movement ripple outward into the cool air, sensing the gentle weight of dawn settle softly against his skin. The girl lay beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling, lightly over its edge as though holding on to traces of dreams. The mentor had already begun walking ahead, his silhouette calm and steady against the pale horizon, a quiet marker of presence in the soft light. They moved through the forest in near silence, each step attentive, neither hurried nor hesitant. The boy noticed the sway of branches, the subtle vibration of leaves, the distant murmur of life hidden just out of view. Stretching had become meditation, a slow inhabiting of space, a way to notice without grasping, to breathe fully into the rhythm of presence. Every motion carried a quiet awareness, a gentle acknowledgement of the world around him, and a recognition of the small spaces within himself. The girl hummed softly, a tune without beginning or end, threading through the rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of distant water. The boy lifted his hand slightly toward hers, letting the air between them carry warmth, a silent acknowledgement of companionship and mutual understanding. The mentor remained slightly ahead, steady and deliberate, guiding not by instruction, but by example, his presence a constant pulse that invited attention and awareness to direct their steps naturally. By mid-morning, they arrived at a sunlit glade where grass leaned softly under a tender breeze. The boy knelt, pressing his fingers into the earth and small stones, noticing the subtle curves, impressions, and textures of the world beneath him. Each detail seemed alive, carrying stories and echoes older than he could name. The girl crouched nearby, tracing the outlines of mossy patches and flowers, whispering softly to them, her words private but filled with intent and care. The mentor observed silently, allowing them to discover the quiet wisdom embedded in every surface, every contour, every faint ripple of presence. A gentle stream curved through the glade, its surface calm and reflective. The boy knelt at its edge, letting the water touch his hands. The cool sensation grounded him, reminding him that movement and patience could coexist, that persistence need not be forced or urgent. The girl joined him, letting her fingers create small ripples that expanded across the water, her humming merging seamlessly with the soft murmur of the current. The rhythm they created together filled the space around them, a delicate song of quiet presence and enduring harmony. The mentor's voice rose softly over the sound of water. See how the river shapes its path. It yields, yet persists. Presence is like water. It flows quietly, steadily, without force, yet leaves its mark. The boy reflected on his stretches, the slow elongation of limbs, the deliberate attention to movement and space. The water mirrored his own rhythm, offering lessons in patience, awareness, and gentle guidance that seeped deeper than any words could. He let it settle within him, a quiet rhythm of care and presence that touched both body and mind. By late afternoon, they ascended a gentle slope overlooking a broad valley, softened by the warm golden light of evening. The boy paused, arms half extended, taking in the expanse. He noticed the smallest details, the shimmer of water threads in the valley, the sway of grass in the wind, the distant ripple of trees. Each element held memory, a quiet story embedded in the landscape. The girl pointed toward a distant grove. "See how the trees lean toward the light?" she asked softly. The boy nodded, understanding that their attention, like the trees, naturally reached toward awareness, and that recognition alone was enough. The mentor spoke after a pause, voice calm and low. Every step, every pause, every place leaves an imprint. Simply noticing shapes the world more than we often realize. The boy reflected on the day's stretches, the careful observation, the deliberate presence in each movement. Awareness itself was an act of care, a subtle shaping force. The journey was no longer measured by distance or milestones, but by the attention brought to each moment, each gentle action, each mindful stretch. Evening settled softly, and they built a small fire near the stream. Its flames flickered delicately in the cooling air, gentle yet steady. The boy lay on the grass, stretching long once more, feeling the earth support and cradle him. The girl hummed again, her melody now intertwined, with the soft crackle of the fire and the whisper of night air. The mentor tended the flames quietly, a presence that required no instruction, guiding through mere being, embodying patience, steadiness, and calm. They ate simply, without words. The boy noticed how even small gestures, stretching, observing, listening, carried weight. Presence itself was a quiet act of care, each motion a ripple extending outward, touching the world beyond immediate perception. Awareness became a subtle conversation with the space around him, a gentle acknowledgement of life, teaching him lessons of patience, care, and interconnectedness. Night arrived fully, stars appearing one by one, deliberate and patient in their illumination. The boy stretched again, arms reaching toward the sky, feeling the gentle embrace of space. The girl pointed to constellations she imagined, fragments of birds, rivers, or long-forgotten dreams. He traced his own patterns, honoring differences, finding harmony in divergence. The mentor remained nearby, silent and steady, a pulse akin to the earth beneath them, a reminder that constancy could be quiet, gentle, and reassuring. The boy drifted into dreams, returning to the hall of light that pulsed with patient rhythm. Yet tonight it carried the echoes of the day, the stream, the stretches, the girl's hum, the mentor's steady presence, folding them into the hall seamlessly. He did not chase the light but rested within it, letting connection, awareness, and patience envelop him fully. The hall, the light, and the soft sounds of life became indistinguishable, forming a lullaby of quiet grace that carried him deeply into rest. When dawn finally brushed the horizon with pale gold, the boy awoke, sensing the world unfold softly around him. The girl stirred beside him, fingers curling lightly over her notebook. The mentor had already traced the path ahead, calm and deliberate. The boy stretched once more, arms long and patient, feeling the gentle embrace of space. He understood that the journey had become less about distance or destination and more about presence, attention, and the quiet lessons contained in every small gesture, every mindful step, every gentle stretch. And so they moved onward toward no fixed destination, carrying with them the subtle teachings of presence, patience, and care. Each stretch, each step, each pause acknowledged the quiet stories written in air, water, and earth. The boy realized that even the simplest gestures, stretching, observing, breathing fully, could leave traces of quiet grace, rippling far beyond the day, the path, and even himself. Presence itself had become the journey, the story, and the gift. The morning arrived like a soft sigh, stretching slowly across the horizon. The boy woke first, lying still for a long moment, letting the cool air press lightly against his skin. He stretched his arms, feeling each movement ripple through his body, extending outward and inward, touching space and memory alike. The girl lay beside him, notebook half open beneath her, fingers curling gently over its edge as though holding on to fragments of dreams. The mentor had already begun walking ahead, his figure calm and unwavering, a quiet presence against the pale gold of dawn.